Hello. Right. My goodness, what a great crowd. So what I thought we'd do is just go through some of the stuff in the UKIP manifesto, because for some reason, the press won't talk about it at all. The UKIP manifesto, the interim manifesto that I believe Jared Batten wrote, is actually very, very good. It addresses many of the issues that I'm personally concerned about, and I can see why the press don't want to talk about it, because if it was widely known that these are the things that UKIP would do very well. For example, the first one on the list is, of course, Brexit. They say that UKIP stands for a complete and total withdrawal from the European Union. UKIP is the only party to establish a Brexit plan. This is available for download from the website. In short, UKIP stands for no more money to be paid to the EU. No more EU laws imposed upon us, no more jurisdiction over us by the European courts, and no more open border EU immigration. Is that or is that not a great policy? Is that not just the first thing we should do? The second point is the NHS policy in England. Now, I'm a supporter of the NHS, and so is UKIP. As they say, UKIP believes in an NHS free at the point of delivery. The NHS is in crisis, not just from a lack of adequate funding, but because of inefficient use of funds. The NHS is the National Health Service of this country, and they wish to prevent health tourism, which, with open borders, with countries that do not have a National Health Service, is an inevitability. This is something that we have to stop, because this is something that the British taxpayer has to pay for. It's also turning into something of a pyramid scheme. If you have 300,000 net migration into the country every year, then you have 300,000 people who now have access to our health services who have not paid for them. Of course, they will stay, and I'm sure eventually they will start paying taxes. But then the next year, you have another 300,000 people who come in who have not paid into the system. This is a drain on you, the taxpayer. This cannot be allowed to go on. It is unsustainable. Milton Friedman is actually correct in this regard. You can have social services or you can have open borders, but you cannot have both, as one will destroy the other. So we have to make a choice. Do we have unlimited mass immigration, or do we have social services? I land on the side of social services, as does UKIP. Point number 3, social care and mental health in England. There is an increasing proportion of older people in the population, and they have care issues that are not being addressed. They wish to increase this by £2 billion per year in order to make sure that none of our older or unhealthy people go without treatment. I think that's very fair. That leads into the welfare and disability policy in England, which is very much the same. They intend to end the ATOS-style work capability assessments. Now, I'm sure you've seen some wonderful reporting on these, where people who have cancer and are literally at death's door are deemed fit to work. Because UKIP is not the Conservative Party. We are not the party of austerity. We're a party who actually care about the people of this country. The fifth point is immigration. And this really does bleed into all other points, because most of the problems that we're having are because of a lack of control of people coming into this country. They say mass uncontrolled immigration has been extremely damaging to Britain. We have imported cheap labour by the million. This not only exploits migrants, but depresses wages and living standards for those at the bottom end of the economic scale, drives up property prices and rental costs. This is all true. This is inarguably logically consistent. There is no way that you can increase the amount of competition for low-skilled jobs without making it more difficult for the people in this country who are already trying to get those low-skilled jobs. A few years ago, there was a study done by the Bank of England that confirmed this. Since the Brexit referendum, something like 150,000 Eastern Europeans have gone back to their countries. And what's happened? We are now at the lowest rate of unemployment since 1975, and every week, we learned a couple of days ago, wages are rising by 3.5% per week. This is not good for major corporations. This is not good for the business-owning class of the country, the international types, who think, well, all of the cheap labor in the world is good for us because that's less for the major cost for any business. However, it is good for the regular working person. That's more money in your pocket. It also leads on to the housing issue. The UK does not have a housing problem, as they put it, and very well, I think. It has a demand problem. And we learned the other day, it's 2 days ago in the Daily Mail, I hate to cite the Daily Mail, but I think they are accurate on this case, that there are going to be another 4 million houses built in this country in the next 20 years. Again, it's not that there is a lack of houses, it is a ridiculously increased demand because of mass immigration, which is what they say. Simply, the housing supply cannot keep up with demand. We cannot stabilize the housing problem until we have controlled immigration. And that's true. And they'll say, well, we've got vast tracts of land that we could build houses on. But why should we? Why should we be housing other people from other countries at the expense of our green and pleasant land? Why? What do we owe these people? Why should it be us doing this? Why should the business class, the ownership class of this country, put this burden upon you, the regular taxpayer? It's not fair. It's not fair to ask you to do this. It's not fair to ask you to shoulder the burden of their desire to save the world. They can't do it. You can't do it. It's not fair. It's unsustainable and it cannot go on. Point 7 is education and training, and point 8 is transport. I'm going to be honest, I'm no expert on these subjects, but I mean, I can't critique what they've said, but it seems fairly sensible and reasonable to me. One of the things that I find interesting that they mentioned in the NHS part is that they wish to start training our doctors, British people, to be British doctors. I think this is a very sensible state of affairs. What they would like to do is waive student fees for people who become doctors and nurses in exchange for a guarantee of 5 years working at the NHS. I think that's a fair deal. I think that it makes sense that we can train our own doctors and nurses, because there is actually a negative consequence of headhunting them from the third world. If you say, ask an Indian doctor to come over, we'll pay him twice as much as what he can earn in India, he's going to come. He's deeply incentivized to come. Why would he not? But this is a form of neo-colonialism, because we did not pay for this doctor to become a doctor. People in India did. They raised him, they nurtured him, they sent him to school, all at their own expense, and then we steal them. We get them to come here to work for us, which again is putting our own people out of work, and it's also depriving India of their much-needed human capital. These countries are struggling to develop, and us stealing their best and brightest is not doing them any favors. I believe that this is an irresponsible thing that our country is doing, not just for our own people, but for Indian people as well. Not only are we taking their skilled workers, but we are pulling up the ladder for our own working classes and making it more difficult for them to get out of their situation. The next step is foreign affairs and overseas aid. Post-Brexit, Britain's foreign policy will no longer be linked to the EU's common security and defence policy, which would inevitably involve us in the EU's planned armed forces. Now, much to the chagrin of every Remainer in the country, yes, there will be an EU army. Instead of denying that this army is going to exist, now they've got to the point where they're saying, well, why is that bad? Do I have to explain why it's bad that we let a German-controlled European superstate that is unaccountable to the demos have its own army? Do I have to explain this? I think not. Needless to say, UKIP's foreign policy is going to be entirely focused on whether it is within Britain's interests to get involved, with an eye to not getting involved if we do not need to. As in, what is good for the country, not what is good for the international class. When it comes to defence and security, UKIP obviously want to meet our 2% GDP commitment to NATO, because we are still a member of NATO, again rendering the European Union obsolete in the arguments of defence. When it comes to veterans issues, again, I'm no expert on this, but they indeed do plan to make sure that our veterans are well looked after, something that I don't think you can expect from Labour or the Conservatives. Police and criminal justice. Now, this is where I'm actually particularly interested, because I've been noticing a politicisation of the institutions of this country. Now, I'm sure you may not be aware, but the police in this country were founded on Peel's 9 principles. Now, this was a set of principles to make sure that the police in this country police by consent. We are the only country, as I'm aware, that actually has this. And it is why our police are considered to be so patient and tolerant and gentle, because we know that they are there for our good, and it is our duty to cooperate them if they have an issue with us. This can only be achieved if we can guarantee the political neutrality of the police. Now, you may well have seen that there are police, and I believe it's Bedfordshire, who have pride flags painted on their police cars. Now, I'm completely in support of the issues that the Pride movement is trying to raise. I'm an atheist. I have no moral objection to gay marriage or homosexuality or anything of the sort. However, I do have an objection to the police taking a stance on it, because whether you agree with it or not, it is a political stance, as you can see by the Muslim mums in Birmingham who are actively campaigning against this issue. Now, I don't agree with them. I think that they're wrong, but this is political, and the police and all of our other institutions should have no public opinion on it. That's what impartiality is. And so UKIP wish to do a root and branch review of policing with a royal commission, which will establish what is actually required to ensure the police can deliver the service that they deliver efficiently, effectively, and impartially. Next point is the prison service. Our prison service is in disarray and close to meltdown. Now, this is something that a lot of people don't realize. And this is something that Tommy Robinson had been talking about for quite some time. There is a huge problem with gangs in prisons. This has to be addressed, but no one wants to, because suddenly the issue of Islamophobia is raised, which, if you were a Labour Party supporter, you know, they are trying to define as expressions of Muslimness, which is so vague, I can hardly imagine under what criteria I would even be allowed to critique ISIS under that definition. It is, of course, in their opinion, a form of racism, which is nonsense. It is an ideology, not a race. It is something that people can and do willingly leave, except those people are often attacked by their own communities. The prisons are a breeding ground for this kind of radicalization, because in prisons you have gangs, and a lot of these gangs require you to essentially join an ideology. There are obviously white supremacist gangs in prison. There are Islamist gangs in prison. And if you want to remain safe in these prisons, that's often what you have to do. The problem is that the networks that form in these prisons do not stay in these prisons. When these people leave prison, these people are now part of these networks, and it is a path to radicalism. It's very difficult to talk about this. There are many people who try and shut you down for talking about this. Frankly, I'm surprised there aren't a bunch of black-clad communists attacking people left, right, and center. But these are the facts. These are the difficult issues we have to look in the face. And I think it is incumbent on the sensible, regular, liberal-minded people to not sweep these under the rug just because it would make them feel better. Out of sight, out of mind is not going to get us through all of this. We have to start tackling this head on. We have to start abandoning the culture of public shaming, because once again, that is a method of coercion. It is not right that a Twitter mob can dictate your life when you talk about a difficult issue. Point 14 is agriculture. Post-Brexit, the UK will be free of the costs and impositions of the Common Agricultural Policy. We will move to a system that subsidizes large landowners, that subsidizes large landowners to one that supports food producers and environmental protection. Again, not my specialist subject, but I see nothing to object to there. That seems like a fine idea. Can we support the small local farmers at the expense of international agriculture? People like Monsanto? I think we should. I think, in fact, it should be the duty of the government to protect these people. Point 15 is the fisheries. Now, I'm sure you're aware that the European Union has destroyed British fisheries, and you can go anywhere in the southwest, a place that was famous for it, and see the damage. UKIP wants the total withdrawal from the EU's common fisheries policy without the need for a transition period when we leave the EU. That's a very sensible thing to do, because that would allow us to literally just send the boats out and actually fish in our own waters, the 200-mile exclusion zone that is British sovereign naval territory, ocean territory. This is currently being fished in by the French and Spanish. We can't do this ourselves, but they can. We're apparently allowed to fish scallops in French waters until French fishing vessels come out and actually attack English fishing vessels, which is something that happened very recently. We are not being treated fairly in this regard. We are an island nation. We should be able to fish in our own waters. And it's just against common sense to think that we can't. It's ridiculous. Point 16 is the economy and trade. Britain's trade policy has been under the control of the European Union since we joined in 1973. Our businesses have been obliged to obey EU legislation even when they do not export to the EU. And again, I speak to the tyrannical nature of the European Union here. Why should businesses that do no business with the European Union be bound by regulations from them? Leaving the EU will free Britain to pursue its own trade and commercial policies with enormous opportunity for increased trade and employment. Post-Brexit, they wish that Britain will regain its seat on the World Trade Organization as an independent country and be free to decide our own trade policy and negotiate trade agreements, where appropriate, with other countries. Now, I can't just sit here and give you a list, although Donald Trump does keep offering us an amazing trade deal by his own rhetoric. Of course, how amazing that is stands to be decided, but there are countries outside of the European Union, in fact, most countries are outside of the European Union, who would like to trade with us. Point 17 is industry. Again, not one of my strong suits on that one, I'm afraid, so I'm just going to skip over it, but obviously UKIP wishes to revive British industry where possible. The only point that I actually disagree with is under the energy section, which is point 18. The UK needs a mix of energy sources comprising nuclear, conventional and renewable. Brexit will allow the UK to set its own future energy policy with lower prices and more secure supplies. Now, one part, and this is the only part that I found myself actively objecting to. UKIP would seek to rejuvenate the UK's coal industry wherever that's possible. Now, I don't know why that's in there. I believe it's trying to speak to the working class communities in the north who used coal as a means of their livelihood. Now, I think that that time has passed. I think that that's not something we can rejuvenate. And I think it'd be more responsible for us to move to nuclear, but I don't get to write the manifestos. Point 19 is the environment. And I like the way that this is phrased very much because I don't know anything about anthropogenic climate change. I don't know anything about the subject. I know you do, chap. It's not my subject, but I think that there is an important distinction that they make here that actually allows us to approach the topic without having to commit to any particular form of dogma. Can you get me a glass bottle? Where? Okay, well, I couldn't find one when I needed a drink. Sorry, buddy. But I'm not an environmental activist. I just think it's a good idea. All right? I'm not an environmental activist. I just think it's a good idea. Anyway, the environment. We should separate the dogma of anthropogenic, which is man-made climate change, from environmentalism itself, which is care and protection for the environment. Now, I think that's a great idea. And I like the fact that the guy raised the issue about the bottles, because I don't like plastic bottles. I don't like plastic bags, and I don't like plastic straws. I'm aware that there is a problem that these things do not break down, and when they do, they introduce microplastics into the environment. This is a fairly simple, fairly easy solution, is just to ban them. Now, I'm not a big fan of state intervention, but I think in this regard, it's not too much to ask. I think it's actually fairly reasonable. I think that we could get it done fairly easily. Small businesses. And this is where I'm very concerned because I'm a small business owner. Now, I was just talking to our communist friends over there. And while saying, I'm not joking, the councillor said to me that he would like to seize the means of production. It's not going to last 20 years, love. It's not going to live 20 years. And there's going to be chaos when it goes down in flames. Look at Paris at the moment. Germany's going into a recession. Italy is being led by anti-European parties. The second largest contributor is leaving. The project is failing. The project is failing.
You are the ruin of Britain.
I would love to be able to take credit for ruining your project, but unfortunately I'm not that important.
I have no project. I am a pensioner.
But you support the European Union.
British jobs. I am a European.
Well, what about our fishing jobs? The European Union ruined those. We're an island. Shouldn't we have those back? Why should the Spanish fish in our waters?
I can understand the grievances of fishermen. I agree. Your waters should be fished by yourself. Europe is not perfect.
No, it's destroying our jobs. In fact, it's run terribly.
Who destroyed?
Did you not hear Guy Verhofstadt staffers calling us a colony?
Honda and Nissan moved out of England. Who destroyed that?
Do you know why? Do you know why? Do you know why Honda are leaving? Honda are leaving Europe entirely. They are moving back to Japan. It's nothing to do with Brexit, and what it is to do with is the reduction of use in diesel, because people are becoming aware of the issue of particulates that diesel fuel causes. It is actually polluting the environment, and people, as informed consumers, are making sensible decisions, and that's affecting Honda. It's nothing to do with Brexit.
Yeah, and how do you replace...
Well, hang on. Don't just move on from that. Do you accept that you were wrong on that issue?
No, I don't accept that.
Why?
No.
That's what Honda themselves said. That was their statement. I live in Swindon, where the plant is. I paid very close attention to this. They stated we're leaving Europe.
Okay. People have to give reasons, but the real reason is
no. The real reason is not this.
If England leaves Europe, they are no longer attractive to the work market.
That's not true at all, because we're going to reduce our taxes on businesses and get foreign investment in. In fact, we're going to undermine the European Union and take it down as quickly as possible. It is a tyrannical organization run by unaccountable people and funded by the Germans. Yes, we're going to bring it down. To hell with the European Union. It's the Fourth Reich.
Yeah. What gives you the right to say that Germany is not a democracy?
I didn't say Germany wasn't a democracy, but I
you
would have
said
no.
That
I said the European
Reich
Union.
Was it a murderous dictatorship?
I didn't say that, but it was.
It was. Yes. It is a fact.
That's
but
true,
you are now saying the Fourth Reich. Germany is not the Fourth Reich.
No, the European Union is the Fourth Reich. Germany just funds it.
No, that is complete rubbish.
I don't think it is.
That is complete rubbish.
I don't think it is. I think the euro itself is a political project, not an economic one, to take over Europe through the back door. The Germans simply can't help themselves in this regard, and I do not wish to be dominated by Germany.
No, you are not dominated by Germany. Who gave you that idea?
Who's paying for all of this?
We have taken in 1.4 million refugees.
No, you haven't. No, you have not. You've taken in about 500,000 refugees, because only 30% of those refugees actually came from Syria. This is the German government's own statistics I'm citing here.
We have taken in 1.4.
You have taken in people from Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia. What war is going on there? These are not refugees.
Figures that are not true.
I am not. I am citing the German government's own figures. 30% of them. 30% came from Syria.
No.
You are just wrong.
No.
I'm sorry you were wrong.
We have taken, can I just finish my point?
Of course.
We have taken in 1.4 million refugees. They're from different countries. There might not all refugees from war zones. There might be economic refugees.
There is no such thing as an economic refugee.
Yeah, okay. Everybody is living pretty and not starving. We know that.
It's just that by that logic, how do we stop? Where is the limiting principle of that idea?
Listen, we, the Europeans, for years had colonies in Africa.
Oh, here we go. Now we get to the white guilt.
Exploited people.
I imagine the Germans do have a lot to feel guilty about. But the British don't have anything to feel guilty about. We created civilization. We created the modern world. We ended the slave trade. We made everything great about democracy.
What about the concentration camps in the Boer War? You didn't create that.
I'm sorry, say again?
What about the concentration camps in the Boer War? You didn't create that.
But they weren't extermination camps, were they?
What?
They weren't extermination camps.
Do you know how many Boer people, women and children starved to death?
I am aware that
tens of thousands.
Terrible things happen during wars. Yes.
Unfortunately, I have to go. I think you have to learn a little bit
more
about history.
And I think you need to learn a little bit more about the European Union. Sorry. But I'm more than happy to have any interruptions from anyone. Well, hang on a second. Let me finish the manifesto if possible. Right, so small businesses, UKIP is in favour of. They're not against international corporations, of course, but they are in favour of these corporations paying their fair share, which they are not. And the common argument against this is, well, if we make them pay their taxes, then surely Starbucks will leave. Okay, the demand for coffee isn't going to leave, and that means there's a huge hole in the market. So all number of small coffee shops are going to spring up, and this will enrich the people of this country, the entrepreneurs of this country. We are supposed to be a nation of shopkeepers, as Napoleon described us. At this point, we're becoming less and less so. Point 21 is taxation, and I think that this is the best way to put it. UKIP believe in allowing people to keep as much of their own income and wealth to spend according to their own needs and priorities. That's the opposite of the Labour Party, who are literally running on a ticket of, we will raise your taxes. I don't want my taxes raised, thank you very much. I already pay enough. Point 22, and again, it's very rare to find any political party that will say anything this bold these days, but I can't help but think that as a family man and a father myself, this is definitely something that we need to put back into the public dialogue and consider. Stable, active, and intact two-parent families are the bedrock of a robust society, whereas broken families are much more likely to be dependent on the state, have poorer physical and mental health, and contribute to a less productive society. That is unarguably true. Anyone can see the statistics on this. If you look at the, say, knife gangs in London, David Lammy in 2012 was pointing out that these young men are all fatherless. It is bad for their IQ, it is bad for their health, it is bad for their achievement, it is bad for their opportunities. It is good to be in a stable, two-parent, loving family. That is the best thing for the children of this country, and subsidizing the opposite of that is irresponsible. There can be no question about this. This is the truth. Are we being attacked by the communists?
No, the police sorted them out. I think fair play to the cops for that, for spotting it.
I would have dodged them. I got reflexes like a cat. Point 23. Sexual exploitation and paedophile gangs. Now, this is definitely something Labour can't talk about, because some of their party members are actually in court for this. It's only an allegation against Lord Ahmed. The systematic and industrialized sexual abuse of underage and vulnerable young people is one of the greatest social scandals in English history. A scandal not just because it happened, but because the responsible authorities swept it under the carpet for decades. Now, we know exactly about this and exactly why this happened, because Dr. Alexis Jay did her report on Rotherham. She found that when this was going on, the authorities, the police, the councillors were afraid of reporting it because they were afraid of being called racists. I walk over to the Labour Party stall, and what do they say? You're a racist, you're a sexist, you're a this, you're a that, you're a the other. No. I'm a liberal, and I'm very annoyed at what the socialists are doing to my country. This is not an acceptable manner to conduct discourse. Nobody needs to hear the opinion of a Labour supporter on what is or is not racist, because they cannot be expected to responsibly delineate between people who are and who are not. They simply call everything racist. Point 24 is animal welfare. Again, not something I'm a particular expert on, so I'm going to skip over that one. And point 25 is Islamic extremism. No one wants to talk about this. The worst excesses of the literalist interpretation of Islamic doctrine have seen unprecedented acts of terrorism in Britain and across the world. This can only be countered with practical measures. And I'm afraid that this is true. I mean, we see this across the Arab world itself. Saudi Arabia have cameras in every mosque. And they follow a pretty goddamn fundamentalist version of Islam themselves. So if they put cameras in their mosques, well, maybe we should start paying attention to what happens in our mosques. Because at the moment, half of the mosques in this country, 46%, everyone thinks that Saudi mosques are the problem in this country. They're not. They're the problem in other countries. In our country, it's Deobandi Islam. Now, that's a form of Islam that was founded to deliberately oppose British imperialism and liberalism, because they believed that liberalism was corrupting Islam. This was founded in a town in northern India, and it is the religious sect of Pakistan, which is why half of our mosques are this form of Islam. This form of Islam is anti-British, highly puritanical, very fundamentalist, and responsible for a great deal of terrorism. It is the form of Islam that the Taliban follow. We should not allow this to proliferate in our mosques. Now, one important thing I think is worth saying here is that Islam is now a part of Britain, and it is here to stay. We are not going to get rid of it. It will be here forever. So we need to make of it a British form of Islam, something that is not opposed to the existence of this country, its people, or its philosophy. What we need is for the government to recognize a form of Islam that it would be appropriate to teach in our mosques. In the same way that we wouldn't allow, if in pubs and clubs around the country, neo-Nazism was being preached, I would expect them to do something about that too. This has to happen. We are not going to persecute Muslims. We are not going to kick them out of the country. We are not going to violate their rights in any way, shape, or form, because they are citizens and they deserve to be protected by the state just like all of you. Every individual person in this country has rights. However, we cannot allow the proliferation of violent and jihadi ideologies. In the same way that, as you saw on the news the other day, I'm sure, a neo-Nazi who was planning to murder an MP was arrested and given life in prison. Good. As he should. There can be no room for violence in our political discourse. UKIP will legislate to ban the overseas funding of mosques and imams. Now, I think that's a fantastic idea, because if you think about the countries that this money is coming from, it's pretty grim. In fact, you probably can't name an Islamic country that you would agree to live under instead of living under our particularly, well, it's starting to become a little more oppressive and dictatorial these days, isn't it? Instead of British rule. UKIP would also repeal legislation that gives legal recognition for Sharia law courts. Now, I'm not sure that we should be able to describe them as Sharia law courts, but there is legal recognition for them, and I am personally of the opinion that we probably shouldn't have religious courts in this country. I'm an ardent secularist. I do not believe that we should have religious courts of any religion, and I think this is something we should actually be quite firm on. Of course, they can go and have any kind of private arbitration in their own communities as they want. We can't stop that. They're free to associate. But I don't think that we should give them any kind of legally recognized status. Point 26 is constitutional and political reform. Again, I'm not too sure what I would agree with there, and that's a long conversation, so I'll skip over that because there's an awful lot to talk about in that regard. But it is an issue that needs to be tabled. We have a problem with our historic constitution because it requires us to actually want to maintain the intention of the people who created each individual part, either act or part of legislation or judicial verdict. It requires us to maintain the intention with which those things were passed. And I don't think that we can say that Parliament is going to represent the actual, fairly represent the actual intention of these things, which is why we have a problem with freedom of speech in this country. Because we do actually, in our unwritten constitution, have freedom of speech codified as one of your human rights. And yet, thousands of people every year are arrested and charged for saying things that are quote-unquote offensive on social media. You can thank the Labour Party for this, for putting it in the 2003 Communications Act, Section 127, which is the only part of English common law that criminalises gross offence. I don't care how grossly offensive something is. No one in this country should go to jail for pissing someone else off or be fined for something like that. Totally agree. And you know what? I hated what the British state did in that regard. I don't like the fact that he's being arrested, obviously. I think it's ridiculous. And if you look at the judge who convicted him, that judge had also convicted a homeless man under the Firearms Act for having a plastic gun, a water pistol, and pointing at people saying, "Give me your money, it's a stick-up." Convicted under the Firearms Act. I don't know what's going on with that judge, but he also convicted Dankula for this joke. But the problem that I really have with it, and I mean, you can say, well, this is all the law. Okay, fine. The problem I had with it is that they wouldn't even let him be a martyr to this. He couldn't say, I won't pay the fine. You have to come and arrest me and give me 2 months in jail, which I think was what he was looking at. They instead just went straight into his bank account and took the money, which to me is what a totalitarian state does. This is what a Nazi state would do. This, I don't know. I don't know. It doesn't feel legal, does it? And not only that, it robs him of his agency. He should be able to make the choice. Look, you're required by law now to pay this £800 fine. Are you going to comply or are you going to go to jail? And he should have the opportunity to make that statement. Because this is honestly, and I don't want to use comparisons to the Fourth Reich, but it is the sort of thing that a totalitarian country does. Removing the martyrs is the first thing. When you are doing something wrong in a totalitarian country, Nobody hears about it. They pick you up, they whisk you away, and they make sure that no resistance can form around your memory. This is the sort of thing that a totalitarian state does. It makes sure there can be no martyrs because the public simply won't be aware. This is what the British government is doing in this regard, and I think knowingly as well. Point 27 is a contentious point because it is genuinely one that needs to be spoken about, and you will find no other party that will even raise the issue. But it is honestly one of the defining questions of our time, and nobody really thinks about it. Point 27 is English identity. Already people are starting to feel a bit strange, right? Do we talk about the English? Are we a people? Are the Welsh a people? Of course. Are the Scottish a people? Of course. Are the Irish and Northern Irish a people? Of course. So why are the English not allowed to recognize that they too are a people? Because as soon as you say, well, yes, there is something called an Englishman, an Englishwoman, they have a particular culture, they live in a particular place, they have a mode of thinking, a way of actually conducting their lives, suddenly you realize that mass immigration and multiculturalism is an attack on that. And I'm no collectivist. I'm not saying we need to put anything above anything else. I do genuinely believe in the rights of the individual. But I also believe that this is a discussion that needs to be had because if you listen to foreigners talking about England, they realize very quickly after being here for a short period of time that the English have a massive identity crisis. We do not know who we are. And we have actually arrived back in the 1930s where George Orwell would talk about this and say, well, if you look at the intelligentsia of England in my day, they are broadly communist and deeply Anglophobic. I think we can agree that the literal communists on the BBC who say the English flag is the most racist flag in the world, that England, and as this woman who popped by, has to apologize for the British Empire, has to apologize for being what they are, and should make way for other people, I think we can say that we've arrived back in the same position. Now, it's been not very common that the English intelligentsia actually like their own country. I think generally they feel, frankly, that it comes down to a sense of fairness. I think they feel that we've made a good country. And I think that deep down they feel that it's not really fair that we would have a good country and other people wouldn't. But they have to understand this is a good country because of the way we run it. It's not because of any innate superiority of blood or any brilliant ideas that the English have alone had, although maybe that is actually the case. It's about what we do. We cooperate with our police. We protect private property. We do not allow arbitrary detention by the state. We are individualists. We are concerned about individual liberty. We are against corruption. We are for the rights and freedom of the individual. And that makes a wildly productive country, which is why every country in the English-speaking world is a first world country. These are why. These are the rules by which you run a society, and any society can be run this way and become just as prosperous. This is something we should be confident in and project out towards the world. There should be people in every country who say, well, you know what, I'm an Englishman too. I think that my country, and wherever, it doesn't even matter where in the world it is, I want to run my country this way. I want the things that they have, and there is an easy way for them to get it. It just requires a bit of understanding and a bit of discipline. It's very brave of UKIP to include this in their manifesto, because UKIP is not an identitarian party, but this is something that must be discussed. Point 28 is free speech and political correctness. Now, you are going to like the way that this is phrased. UKIP believe in allowing our people their traditional rights of freedom of conscience, liberty, and speech. These rights have been eroded over recent decades by the burgeoning concepts of so-called hate speech, driven by the political doctrine of cultural Marxism, which seeks to close down discussion, and alternative views so that only one extreme, left-wing, politically correct viewpoint is allowed. Is that not the best thing you've ever heard? No other political party will say anything like, come on, let's have a round of applause for that, come on. And again, it is so brave to write things like this in a manifesto, because the politically correct class of this country will read this and flip out. They don't want free speech because it doesn't benefit them. Free speech is for people who do not hold power. Free speech is to those who wish to hold power to account. It is entirely in the interests of the ruling classes of this country to not have free speech, so they can shut down dissidents. They can find a reason not to listen to you. They can say, oh no, sorry sir, I'm outraged that you would say that. I don't need to hear what you have to say. It can't go on forever, and it won't go on forever. Point 29 is cost savings, which I'm afraid I don't know much about. And point 30 is many of the above for, obviously, the rest of the, the rest of the country. So that is a brief overview of the UKIP manifesto. I think it's a very, very good manifesto. There is only one thing in there that I disagree with, and it's a minor point that I think that can be hashed out in discussion. But otherwise, it's incredibly important that we recognize that UKIP is actually prepared to hit key social issues and illnesses in this country that nobody else wishes to talk about. So I think that's enough pontificating from me. What I'd appreciate is to have a discussion with anyone, absolutely anyone, who has anything that they would like to say, anything they would like to challenge me on, anything they would like to critique me on, anything that they would like more information about. Well, hang on a second, sir. I'm going to ask people to form a queue if that's okay. Of course they don't. Of course they don't. Of course they don't. They've got no interest in allowing someone like me into their club, which is why it's all the more important to force someone like me into their club. Because you might be wondering, well, who is this guy? Who is this offensive man from the internet who tells jokes at the expense of communists and Labour? I repeat myself. Who is this guy? Well, I'm the son of a sergeant in the RAF. I'm not someone important. I didn't go to Eton. But I do study this sort of stuff because it needs to be done. Someone has to. Who am I funded by? Regular people. I'm just funded by public donations. I don't have big business behind me. Imagine the thought. I don't have any of these people behind me. My interests are very much like yours because I'm just a regular person. I don't have a prestigious background. I don't have important connections. I am the one who the press are punching down at on a daily basis because I'm continually punching up at them for the damage that they are doing to this country. Please come and have a chat with me, and primarily, if you are in opposition to any of the things that I'm saying, I would like to speak to you first. So if you disagree with me on something of a point of principle, please do come down to the front. If we can form a queue, I suppose there, that would be wonderful. And I would love to hear from absolutely everyone. Thank you. Yes, indeed.
All right, mate, come on.
This country...
Well, hang on a second, sir. So if you... but first, what was your name, please?
Paul.
Paul, nice to meet you, Paul.
Oh, Paul.
Thank you. Right, so what would you like to say?
I'd like to... All this corruption in this country is involved in Freemasonry, Masonic. All these people high up in power are corrupt. They are the puppet masters. They're going to be destroyed. Freemasonry, Masonic is illegal in this country. They are behind what's going on. Like the man just said, John just said there. It's because there's corruption, cover-ups. Judges can't be sacked. They do their job wrong, they should be sacked. We do our job wrong, we should be sacked. Mrs. May did her job wrong, she should be sacked. What happens? They're in a bloody job. Right, another thing is, all these people in the institutions, police, the NHS, the governments and councils, etc., when they make a mistake for it, who pays for it? The taxpayer. Comes out the bloody taxpayer, comes out the treasury. What should happen is, if these councils, police, or people in authority make mistakes, they should have a direct debit from their wages back into the system. Take it out of the treasury and they put it back into the system, and I'll be cheeky, with 100% bloody interest. And they will learn by their mistakes. Every mistake they make, they pay for. We pay for our mistakes. The establishment are going to pay for the mistakes.
Right, if I can speak to the issues that I think you're raising there. I don't know anything about Freemasonry, so I'm not going to speak to that. But I think you are absolutely right that there has been a real problem with accountability in our institutions. So, for example, like you say, the expenses scandals with the MPs, it turned out that over half of Parliament had their parliamentary credit cards suspended because they were taking advantage of this. Over half of the MPs in this country are fiddling the books. They're taking money out of the taxpayer.
Yeah. They should pay for their mistakes.
Absolutely.
What do? They get a check out. Oh, non-deploying the check. Oh, we make mistakes. Oh, Joe Blogg's taxpayer will pay for it. It ain't coming out their pocket.
Yep.
I was in the RAF for 9 years. When you get fined, it comes out your wages. And the same should happen to authority. Comes out their salary at the end of the month with 100% interest. Make a mistake, they pay for it. We're all equal. They are no different from us. And they are no different from me. And why should we, the taxpayer, pay for other people's mistakes? They don't pay for our mistakes. Why should we pay for their mistakes?
Well, I agree. It's very good. And I find it very interesting how you say things are being covered up. Well,
it's all Masonic.
I don't know.
Hang on.
I agree with you, and I think that Jimmy Savile is the primary example of that. I mean, the Westminster dossier that was created went mysteriously missing on a taxi. That's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, exactly. It's such a coincidence. He just forgot it on the taxi, and there was no backup. There was no. It wasn't saved anyway. It was just gone, and that's that issue completely erased. There's no doubt that there are cover-ups in this country.
Yes, and these cover-ups shouldn't be covered up. There's too many creeps in the system, and that is what's wrong. Get rid of the creeps. Get them out.
Thank you very much. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Okay. So I find it very interesting as well, the cover-ups. The Jimmy Savile stuff happened for, 40 years in the BBC? And you can hear all of the stories about it. You can hear the victims coming out and talking about it. The people who are running the establishment knew it was happening. They covered it up, and I'm sure in many ways they facilitated it, and yet they'll never be held to account. Nothing will ever happen. But anyway, hello, sir. What's your name?
My name is Jake.
Do you take that?
And I wanted... Oh, yeah,
right.
of course. Yeah, thank you.
Hang on a sec. Is it? There it is. Right. And if you
all right. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Yep. Well, my name is Jake. I'm a British resident, and this is actually my hometown. And the issue I wanted to bring up was something that is quite contentious, but it's something that you said earlier. And it's going to be quite difficult to explain, but I'm visually impaired, and I went to a specialist place down in Devon when I went to school and subsequently college. Now, what I'm going to be bringing up is, again, something you brought up, and that's the topic of paedophilia, which is a difficult topic to talk about at the best of times. Now, it brought back memories when you brought it up, but it's something that did get resolved, and it's something I wanted to bring out there because it's something that no one brings up, and it's related.
Hardly a comfortable topic, is it? No one wants to have to talk about this.
No one's going to want to, but it's something that is quite important, especially if you want to protect the progeny of the country.
Yes. And as a father, I really do.
Yes, and congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Now, there is a man who did a documentary series, and he did get into some legal trouble recently, and his name is Stinson Hunter. Now, he is what is known, and his show was known as the paedophile hunter, and he spends all of his time online hunting down and arranging and basically catfishing until he can arrange a meeting with a paedophile, and, obviously they get shocked that he's not actually a child. And then he sends all of his evidence to the police. And he got into some serious legal trouble for doing this. Now, this relates to me because while I was 8 years old, I'm now 26, even if I don't look it, I was actually, as I said, I went to a specialist school that not only specialised in visual impairments, but also other conditions, cerebral palsy, autism. Yeah. And I was actually sexually molested as a boy. I was 8 years old, and it was by a boy who was 6 foot. He was enormous. He was quite enormous, morbidly obese. He had severe cerebral palsy and eyesight problems, but he didn't have anything wrong with him up here, up in his mind.
Right.
And I didn't know at the time because I was so young and I thought he was my friend. I didn't realize it was actually a sexual assault. But years later, when I went back and on the memory of it, I realized that he was a paedophile. And then my suspicions were confirmed when in an Exeter newspaper, it was found out that he'd been put under house arrest for sexually molesting his 13-year-old cousin.
Right.
And that confirmed my suspicions that not only was he a paedophile, he was an equal opportunist.
If I might ask, what's the wider point you're trying to make here, please?
My wider point is that our police system, thanks to the lack of funding, has now gone down. There's only 3 officers on at Christchurch, the nearby town, and I don't think that the subject of paedophile is taken as seriously in our system as it should be, as, say, drunken abuse, drug offences. I think because it's such a contentious issue, I don't think it's quite taken as seriously as it should be, and I think there should be entire units in police systems, more given more funding to set up individual units that are specifically tackling those kinds of crimes.
Right.
Because it was well on for 6 years before this guy saw justice.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that we've got many examples of where the criminal justice system actually isn't taking this as seriously as possible. And in many ways, political correctness is responsible for this, but I think in many ways, like you say, it's more a fact that the unsavory nature of the subject is a deterrent in and of itself, I think.
Yes, I would have to agree with that. My other question is, because it was by a man who had multiple physical problems, should he be punished as seriously as someone that had literally nothing wrong with them? He had nothing wrong with him up here, though.
Yeah,
that's the reason for my contention.
I would leave that decision to a judge. I don't feel that I'd be best placed to judge that, but
No.
I mean, I think that if what we're talking about here is moral culpability, and so the way that we treat people is we treat them on a personal level. And so if you would say step on my foot, and I thought of you as a moral actor, you had moral agency, you were able to make your own decisions, I would then hold you responsible for stepping on my foot, and I would ask for restitution. I'd say, well, I'd like to apologise. But if I thought that you were not capable of making moral distinctions and moral decisions, then obviously I wouldn't. I would say, well, there goes Jake or whoever. He couldn't help it. It was something that was outside of his control, and so I wouldn't expect an apology from him because I would understand that he wasn't necessarily in control of everything that he was doing. If it is, as you say, and the chap was completely normal intellectually,
up here, he was fine.
Then I do believe that he is a moral agent. He is responsible for his actions and should be held accountable as such.
My main, I'm obviously I'm directing my question at you, but I'm also directing my question at everyone else around here about what, just to get them to think about that sort of unsavory thing, because otherwise it won't pass through most people's heads.
And a lot of the time people are very quick to say, well, it's out of sight, out of mind. And that's how this sort of stuff proliferates.
My entire family are very, very right wing. And they are very much out of sight, out of mind. You can't talk about certain topics. And I have to disagree with that very strongly. I think you're never going to resolve an issue unless you're actually going to be bringing it up in some capacity.
I totally agree. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
I'm sorry to hear
you.
that.
And congratulations on your campaign to become an MEP.
Oh, thank you. I'm very much enjoying it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
And it's a pleasure.
Yeah, I said hello to David earlier. You coming off at some point? Excellent. Hello, sir. What's your name, please? No.
Hi.
Is
What?
it, right?
Is that right?
Yeah, I believe so. If you hold it so that's pointing at your mouth, because...
Is that fine?
Perfect. What was your name, sir?
My name's Charles. It's an
Lovely to meet
absolute
you, Charles.
pleasure.
to meet you.
Lovely to meet you too.
I'm sorry that you've had so many smears in the press.
Oh, don't worry about it.
I've checked your YouTube videos, and they are smears, no doubt about it.
Yes.
One has to look at context, and for the same reason, I'm sorry.
That's all right. Just a little bit closer.
That Marcus Meechan has also had the same sort of problems as well.
Yeah. Testing. There we go.
Can you hear me now?
We can.
Oh,
yeah.
good. Right.
That's okay.
Okay. I've got a question for you, but before I go into that, I'd just like to comment that, or rather ask, if you see the EU as essentially a fascistic organisation. I say this because if you look at a document that you can get off the internet, which is Mussolini's Doctrine of Fascism, you get the actual definition of what fascism is, and my belief is that very few people actually know what fascism is.
Agreed.
And so from the point of view of you describing...
Well, no, I think I can take you from there, because I agree. I think the European Union does exhibit some facets and some manifestations of fascism. I mean, when I went to the European Union to contest Article 13, I found out what they were legislating for on that day. They were legislating for the length of a candle wick. And to me, that seems remarkably totalitarian. What possible business could they have?
One second. Before I got ill, I was a local solicitor. I've got a law degree. I've done my postgraduate diploma in legal practice, and as a solicitor, I was obliged to do professional exams and also continuing professional development, which included continued studies in EU law.
Yeah.
The first paper I did in my law degree, my first degree, was regarding judicial review and the EU. And I went through hundreds of cases. Not one was ever successful where the complainant was an individual member citizen, a member state, or a corporation. There were 4, and this is in the late 90s.
Yeah.
4. All of them were between other EU institutions, and it pointed out to me very quickly that the European Court of Justice is a political organisation. It is not a court, as we understand a court, in the sense of being impartial.
Yes.
They're very much geared to further pushing the barriers of the boundaries of the state further and further in the interest of the European Union. And that became very clear when you look at things like judicial review, where things that in a member state would have been quite reasonable to go after with the government, it's rejected and held back by the European Court of Justice. So we do have a major problem with the institutions there.
Well, let me talk about that for a second, because I think that's very important. Because, like, I'm glad you brought up actually reading the fascist text, because if you read the Doctrine of Fascism, you realise that they're trying to create what they called an ethical state.
Yeah, everything of the state, everything to the state, and everything from the state.
Nothing against the state. Yes,
yeah, exactly. And the individual, everything about the individual and individualism is subservient so long as it is acceptable, so long as it's subservient to the purposes of the state.
Absolutely. But the key here is the part about it being an ethical state, because the fascist objection to the liberal state in which we live is that the state was the night watchman. It was an impartial mediator between individuals. Because in this country, we think of the person as being the sovereign. You know, you're the king of your castle in your home. That's not what the fascists had in mind. They had a particular agenda to modify the nation and make it a living organism of itself. And that's very much the attitude that the European Union has. They seek to modify Europe and to turn it into something that it previously wasn't. That, in my opinion, is genuinely a fascistic method of government. And when the reason I bring up the fact that they were legislating for candle wick lengths is to display that there is simply nothing outside of their view. There's nothing that they won't bother touching. There are just things that they haven't got around to yet. You know, I mean, if last year they were legislating candle wick lengths, where does that stop? At what point of your life does the European Union say, you know what, we won't touch that? I think that they wish to bureaucratize the entire continent to make it convenient for the people in Brussels.
Well, this segues into the video in 2012 by Vladimir Bukovsky, who was a Soviet dissident in the 1960s. He was imprisoned by the Soviet state, and he's done a video on YouTube drawing the parallels between the Soviet state and actually the institutions of the Soviet state and the institutions of the EU, and they're scarily similar. I don't know if you've seen that.
I haven't seen that one, but I do agree that, I mean, and then again...
Well, for example, the Politburo, he draws the parallel about the appointment of bureaucrats to power from amongst themselves, and draws the parallel with the EU Commission. Similarly, he says, well, in the Soviet Union, they did have a democracy, and they had a parliament. It was called the Supreme Soviet. And that's what you're going to be joining if, hopefully, you succeed in your candidacy.
That's correct, yeah. But that's the point, isn't it? It was all done through bureaucracy. I mean, Stalin didn't come to power. He came to power by using bureaucratic methods. And it's very much the same way that the European Union is being run. It's all done by a vast bureaucracy behind the scenes that is not accountable.
Well, this comes back to the doctrine of fascism by Mussolini, co-authored by Giovanni Gentile. That he argues against democracy on the basis that fascism is an organized authoritarian democracy, as he puts it, which is what we have in the EU.
I agree.
Yeah. Now,
and one last thing as well. It's not just the methods, I think, that in which the European Union represents fascism as well. It's also the ideals, because one of the things that I found very interesting when I was on the floor of the EU, when I was watching from above and I could see the floor, is that they would go through the surface level arguments of, oh, well, this is a policy that we like because of X and we don't like this one because of Y. But it would always, they would go through a series of argumentation, and then it would essentially boil down to Europe above all. You know, the European Union above every other concern.
That's fascism.
And that's fascism. As exactly saying, you know, everything within the state, nothing against the state, nothing outside the state. And that was honestly the impression I was getting with the way they were talking about the European Union. And I was quite disconcerted being there. It was quite a scary experience, actually watching these people who held this higher ideal, higher than your rights, higher than your freedom of speech, higher than your ability to be away from the state. They think that was more important than everything.
Segues on to what my actual question that I originally had for you, which involves the European arrest warrant.
That's a very terrifying thing.
Well, I came across a website, Ian Crane, and he was talking about the persecution of David Noakes and Lynn Thayer. I don't know if you heard of these people.
I haven't heard of those particular ones, no.
Right. Well, they're responsible for developing in the UK a natural product called GC Math. GC Math is glycomacrophage activating factor.
Right.
Now, I know that you've had a good friend who died of cancer. The evidence that they have, and they've had research from 200 scientists and 120 research papers in favour of this, that the evidence is that of terminal cancer patients, they had managed, using this natural vitamin D transport protein, to save 9,000 out of 11,500 people in terminal cancer.
Right.
Given that chemotherapy and radiotherapy will, on average, save about 2%.
Yeah, they're very, very, very unreliable.
It raises a big issue. David Noakes has been imprisoned for breach of the 1939 Cancer Act, which prevents doctors even discussing alternatives to chemotherapy and radiotherapy. For example, they're not allowed to discuss issues like diet and so forth.
Right.
Or non-patented drugs. It's very much in favour of Big Pharma.
Right.
Which leads me on to another European and also UK thing. The MHRA, the Medicine Healthcare Regulating Authority, it has a massive conflict of interest because several of its directors are very closely associated with Big Pharma. For example, the CEO, Ian Hudson, was a former VP of SmithKline Beecham, board member Stephen Lightfoot, was a former general manager of GE Healthcare, MD of Daiichi Sankyo's
Is there any chance we could
Yeah,
just
sure.
go straight to the point, if that's okay?
The point being is that a drug that would cost the National Health Service £400 a calendar month is being prevented from being used because of the very old Act and the big pharma interests. In contrast, chemotherapy costs the NHS about £40,000 a month.
Yeah.
So if you can save that level of money and have a drug that has no known side effects and that has had 80% success rate in clinical trials, why are we stopping it? Why are we also imprisoning people like David Noakes? He's now out on tag. In France, under the European arrest warrant, they wish to take him and his biochemist partner to prison. If France gets their extradition rights, it's likely that he'll spend 2 years in prison before he even comes to trial.
Right. Well, I'm not familiar with this case, so I can't...
Check it out.
I will. I can't comment on it directly. Thank you. But I can't comment on it directly. But I do find the European arrest warrant quite terrifying. The fact that in Europe you could be accused of a crime in, say, Austria, and if you're in Spain, then the police in Spain will come and collect you, deport you to Austria, where you will be held for your trial.
I'd add that you don't actually have to commit a crime in the member state. You could be committing a crime in Germany. If you're wearing a swastika, for example, I'm not suggesting you would.
No, of course.
But were you doing that? That is technically a hate crime in Germany.
Yes.
And you could be arrested for that. And Germany could ask for your extradition.
Yes. So it's the European arrest warrant is a massive overreach of power, in my opinion.
Exactly.
Again, just another reason for us to get out of the European Union as quickly as possible.
Yeah, it's essentially a fascistic state.
Yeah. But thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
And good luck.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. I've not got cancer, I've got to embarrass him.
Oh, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it, honestly.
But when you said about your friend died at 27.
Yes, Daniel, yeah.
I changed my question that I originally had. I thought I'd share it. Do check it out.
I will, thank you. I've got the notes.
Yeah, do a video.
Come on, David, let's have a chat. This will be a healing moment. So this is David Sharratt. It's someone I know from the internet. How's transitioning? I'm sorry.
The transition from Xbox to PC was quite easy.
Well, it's nice to meet another member of the PC Master Race. He knows. A good shirt, by the way, as well.
Yes.
Yeah. So, what would you like to talk about, David?
Well, I'm still trying to work out what exactly your plan is from what you're doing right here. Because from what I can see is you've managed to chase Farage out of UKIP. UKIP has lost 60 councillors. You've managed to completely destroy UKIP's PR, even more than it already had. And you're now simultaneously the worst PR disaster for UKIP and its only source of relevance nowadays.
Isn't that interesting?
Yes.
Isn't that interesting how it can be both things?
Yeah.
Do you not see a contradiction there?
Yeah, you're the only reason they're being talked about, but it's only negative.
Well, membership's up. Membership's over 30,000 now.
I wouldn't even vote for you.
I didn't expect you to. I take that as a threat that you're going to vote for UKIP. I'm going to the press.
Well, maybe with enough pressure. There's not enough beer in the world.
That's really good. So let's talk about some issues then, since we're here, rather than talking about me. I mean, what I was reading out the manifesto. Was there anything you took exception to in that?
Yeah, you seem to contradict yourself on the response to big business. So
at
the start, you said that stopping immigration would be bad for big business because there's now lower unemployment and it means they have to increase wages and stuff like that, right? Then later you said, actually, no, it's going to be good for big businesses because we're going to lower taxes on them, but because we don't want them to leave.
Yeah, I think then
you said straight after that actually who cares about capital flight because the demand for coffee isn't going to go down if Starbucks leaves. So which is it?
Well, these are all true things. That's the thing. I mean, real life is messy and complicated, and nothing is ever consistent. And this is something that literally every German who comes to Britain finds very frustrating if you ask them about it. Nothing is consistent here. We're a land of contradictions, and all of these things are in contradiction. You just don't take them to any
that's
logical
just an example.
extreme.
I just think that's an excuse for being a hypocrite.
No, not at all. Well, who isn't a hypocrite? Name someone that's not a hypocrite. Allegations of hypocrisy are empty. They are worthless. They mean nothing, right? Everyone at some point in their lives is a hypocrite. So don't give me that, right?
Yeah, but you're trying to run for office here.
Yeah.
That
Okay.
matters
Name
more.
a politician who isn't a hypocrite. Yeah, the silence.
okay.
Exactly. So don't give me that
And?
nonsense, right? It's just an attack on the man, not an attack on what I'm saying.
I thought you
right?
were trying to improve politics.
I am going to. I'm going to tell you exactly how, right? So the problem is the distribution of wealth, right? And do you agree that that's a problem?
I would agree, yeah.
Right. And so now how can we distribute wealth? Well, I don't think that we should just seize it. I think it would be anti-democratic. I think it would be against the property rights of the people who own that wealth. But we can incentivize things to change using the market. But the reason the market is as it is now, the reason that wages are being depressed, is because of artificial involvement from the state outside of it. For example, mass immigration. That is actually at the same time suppressing wages and yet growing the overall amount of money that these corporations earn.
You know, immigration rates have gone down to pre-2015 levels. The migrant crisis is over.
We're not talking about the migrant crisis. We're talking about the government's actual just open border policies. 300,000 net people into this country every year.
Well, it's not an open borders policy.
That-
There
no,
are
I
still
consider that
still
open
rules
borders.
around immigration.
Yes, but
it's just that it's
They're
like,
pretty
you
relaxed
think
rules.
It's inconsistent.
300,000 a year is just too many. It's just too many.
Yeah, and then at the same time, Afghan refugees are being sent home and told to pretend to be gay. Pretend not to be gay.
Okay, Afghanistan sucks, man. What do you want from me? Is it our job to fix Afghanistan? That seems
what I'm saying
imperialistic.
is-
We've been there twice already. Didn't fix it then. Do you think we'll do it a third time?
Oh, of course not. But that doesn't mean that we should just start sending refugees back.
But
to
the
get
refugee
killed.
crisis is over.
Well, yeah, this was a couple of years ago, back when it was
Yeah.
still happening.
But that's not what I'm talking about. Refugees, people legitimately fleeing war, fine. You know, like, the Syrians, yeah, let the Syrians in. They need help. They're fleeing a war. But this isn't about Syrian refugees. This is about our open border immigration policy. People who are going to live here.
Yeah.
They're not people who are here because they're afraid and want to go home. They're people who are going to stay
people
here.
the people who want to live here. But the thing is that the only reason they want to live here is because it's so good here.
Yeah, but the only reason it's so good here is because we have a border.
Well, then why is Poland so great? Why is Poland falling apart? Poland has
an
stronger.
ex-Soviet country.
Yeah, and it's got extremely strong immigration policy.
Yes, but it's an ex-Soviet country. If you look at Poland is one of the fastest growing economies in the European Union.
Yeah, because people are actually finally going back. People are actually pouring into the country.
Exactly, they're finally going back because when we take all of
we're making it shittier here, so people
no,
don't want to be here anymore.
We're not. We're making it better here for us, and we're making Poland better for them. Because when we poach their young, energetic, hardworking people, their country starts falling apart. They need those people to build their country. They need them.
Yeah.
It's wrong. It's irresponsible on our part to take those people. It's bad for our own people. It's bad for their countries, but it's good for big business.
Oh yeah,
To
of
hell
course.
with the big businesses. Like I said, if they leave, that's fine. Entrepreneurs will spring up and they'll fill the void.
Well, it's not that simple though, because actually, if anything, jobs are falling apart anyway. We're
I don't agree. We're
No,
at the lowest rate of unemployment since the 70s.
yeah, only because of a very recent loss of people.
Yes, but that's why Brexit was a good thing, because it encourages these people
No,
to
but
go
it's a
back to
temporary
Europe.
measure. It's a very temporary measure. This
Not-
is not
Not if we reduce immigration.
not when things like automation are starting to lower jobs anyway. I think the concept of unemployment, we need to actually move away from that entirely.
This is the sort of argument that the levelers would have made back in the 1600s and the Luddites regarding the machines. People will find other jobs to do.
It's not that simple though, because we have been starting to see a lot of jobs just disappear, and they're being done by self-learning algorithms.
Yeah, I know, but people find other jobs. Other things need to be done. The economy is a constantly evolving beast. Again, this is just the arguments the Luddites make. We need to smash the machines because they're taking our jobs. Well, that's not a concern now, is it? Now it's other things that automation that you're concerned about, but other jobs will arise because of the industry that's being created.
It's a completely different system though.
Yeah, but
Machines
it's the
still
same
need to be
principle.
operated by people.
Yeah, but
Lots of people.
Yeah, but that's the thing. I've actually got a friend who sells robots, and he's saying, no, we train the people to manage the system. We don't have them on the production line now But it'll just become a different economy.
Yeah, but there's less people actually working now.
Yeah,
like
but we're going to have less people in the country.
But then we're not. We're still going to have an increase in population over time.
Well, not if the birth rates carry on as they are.
Ooh, white genocide, eh?
No, just lower birth rates. I'm not saying that's a bad thing.
Well, it is going to be because we need young people, don't we?
Then maybe we should encourage family values.
I completely agree. I think we should increase wages so that young people can actually have kids.
We don't get to set wages.
Yeah, we do.
No, the market sets wages.
We can set minimum wage.
Yep, that's not setting wages. That's setting a minimum wage. The market sets wages, and that all revolves around supply and demand. And the fact that there's more demand than supply at the moment is actually good for the worker because we turn it into a seller's market. The people selling their labor should be the ones who have the advantage rather than the people buying it.
Yeah, that's why I think UBI is a good idea.
Okay, but I don't think
because
you're really engaging with what I'm saying there.
Well, okay, so it's you want to have the market work for the people instead of for the businesses, right?
Yeah.
And for the rich people and stuff like that. So when you're talking about housing, the reason that there's so much demand for housing and there isn't enough supply isn't actually to do with immigration. It's actually to do with the fact that Russian oligarchs are buying up a lot of housing, and there's loads of empty housing in this fucking country.
That's not true. When Jeremy Corbyn said that, there was a study done that found only 1% of London's housing was owned, and it was in that particular rich area as well.
Yeah, maybe in that particular rich area, but if you go to sandbanks, they're all empty.
Yeah, I'm sure there are a lot of them, but that doesn't explain the problems in the north. The housing crisis is not just in London. It's all over the country, and it's because of mass immigration. If we didn't have 300,000 people coming in a year...
It's not hard to buy a house in the north. It's just that they don't have... there's not enough work up there for them to afford the housing.
So it is hard to buy. If they can't afford it, then it's hard for them to buy it.
Yeah.
So it is hard. But again, this wouldn't be a problem.
But it's not that it's unavailable.
But listen, okay,
it's that it's hard to buy.
Why are you so in favour of mass immigration?
I'm not.
Well, then what's the problem?
I'm just saying that we haven't got to this unlimited mass immigration that you keep talking about.
Well, I think
it has reduced in the past few years.
I think 300,000 is too many. I just think that's too many. Because it's putting a huge demand on the NHS, on housing, and various other social factors.
So what policy would you suggest to reduce it?
Just reduce it to about something like 30,000 a year, maybe?
How?
By just saying we're not going to let people in beyond this number?
Just demand people go the second that we get to 30,000 people in a year.
What do you mean demand they go?
Just start denying...
Refusing applications.
Yeah, refusing applications.
Why not?
Because that means our economy won't grow.
Yes, it will grow. We can survive without mass immigration.
We can survive?
We'll do very well. And it'll even be better for the working people of this country. Their wages are going up and they've got more employment than any other time since the 70s. Everything will be fine.
So if there's more people, then we won't have as many jobs. Then there won't be as many jobs to go around. But if jobs start disappearing, people will just find jobs because the market's...
Jobs aren't going to start disappearing. In fact, people are returning...
Jobs aren't going to start disappearing.
Yeah, but people are returning back to the countries of origin, which opens up jobs in the market. It makes labour in demand.
There's less people to sell to. So then, therefore, there's less jobs to...
Yeah, but we still have millions of people in the country. I mean, we're not talking about a town of 10 people and 5 people leave.
Okay.
I don't see why you would want to defend mass immigration when there are such obvious benefits of not having mass immigration. Why? What do we owe these people who want to come to our country? What do we owe them?
We don't necessarily owe them anything.
So there's no moral problem with us saying we're just going to accept 30,000 and no more.
Well, there isn't necessarily a moral problem. I just think that if the Tories are trying to reduce immigration, which they are...
I don't agree.
They have a plan. It's just that they keep failing at their plan.
Okay, I'm happy to agree they're incompetent.
Yeah, they are.
I can believe that, yeah.
But and I think it's to do with the fact that immigration is a bit more complicated than that. That these that when they're planned to it's sometimes something like 4 times as many people actually come in as the Tories plan to.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's necessarily because because of any specific individual incompetence. I think that's just because of the way that these immigration rules actually work. It's not necessarily as much on a numbers basis. They tend to work on these applications on an individual basis.
Yes, but we should set a numerical cap. Because no one has a right to come to this country. We don't owe them anything. We're not obliged to let them in. It's at our pleasure, at our grace that they come in. Well, and if we've decided that for the last 20 years we've had, 8 million people who have immigrated in the last 20 years?
Well, yeah, that's
a
the idea of
huge number.
Yeah, well, that attitude there, where it's like no one has a right to come into this country. That's the attitude of like rights are given, right?
No, that's the attitude of the people who maintain this country.
Normally, it's the idea that rights are taken away. So normally people are okay to come into the country, and then they are denied based on some actual reason. So yeah, okay, if you want to say a certain number of people coming in, but why 30,000?
Well, it could be less, it could be more. I don't know. I mean, we've just got to choose a number.
Yeah, well, you don't have any reasons for that specific number then?
Well, it's a lower number than 300,000.
Is that it?
Yeah, it's 10% of what's coming in now.
That seems a little bit arbitrary.
It is. It's just a number. I mean, we could have 15% if you like. We can negotiate over that number. We could haggle, but we both at least agree that the number of people coming into this country has to be reduced. And there's no moral imperative that is demanding that we open the borders. So there's no particular reason that we should stop, especially when we have a moral argument on the other side for the damage that it's doing to the social fabric, to the economy, etc., etc. We can make these arguments, and they are moral ones from our side. And all you can say is, well, the GDP won't be as high.
Damage.
Sorry?
Well, yeah, well, that money actually matters.
That to the business class, yeah.
Only because the business class are taking it all.
Yeah, but why? I mean, you're making an argument for neoliberalism.
If we can instead tax them higher.
Yeah, but we could instead just not have loads of people competing with our working people in this country who've got no right to be here. They come here at our grace. Why don't we just say no?
So why don't we fuck over other poor people instead of fucking over the rich people?
We're not fucking over anyone.
Yeah, we are. I'm keeping them out of the country. If they want to move, then they can't.
But they don't have a right. They're not entitled to come into our country. Just because their countries suck, that's not our fault.
Well, it kind of partially is in certain cases. It's not necessarily our personal fault, but it is.
It's not Britain's fault in any historical sense either.
In how?
What do you mean how? You're the one saying it is Britain's fault that these countries suck. Well, explain your position.
Well, in a lot of countries, they are post-colonial nations. So,
yeah.
Does Britain have absolutely no historical responsibility for them being shit?
No, we gave them independence. We gave them liberal democracies, the rule of law, and capitalism. A lot of these countries have overthrown that and become socialist states, and then they've become absolute nightmares. Zimbabwe and Rhodesia are the best example here. Rhodesia was a very prosperous country when we gave it independence. Now it's an absolute hole, isn't it?
Well, a lot of the time those are to do with like American-funded dictatorships and stuff.
I think it's to do with socialism.
Socialism?
Yes.
Zimbabwe?
Yes, it's a communist country. Do you know anything about Zimbabwe?
I know it's a massive dictatorship.
Yeah, but the dictator is a socialist. They seize property because they don't like white people owning property.
Well, seizure of property isn't something that just socialists do.
ZANU-PF, I think it is, they're an openly socialist party.
Okay. Fair enough.
This is the thing. Africa's riddled with Marxism, man. And it's ruining Africa. When it was liberally run, it was very profitable. I mean, Rhodesia was the breadbasket of Africa. Now, after the socialists take over and start appropriating property, they've got starvation. They've got mass inflation.
Yeah, I'm not a socialist, so I'm
not I know you're not. But, like, there are genuine problems here, and it's not Britain's fault that these problems have occurred.
Well, then why did we leave?
Because they wanted independence. And instead of being aggressive, authoritarian, imperialist overlords, we said, okay, we'll leave then.
Okay. So it is our fault then.
You mean we should go back in and take over again?
Well, no, not necessarily. I think we should just help. I think that there a lot of the time they do need a lot more foreign aid because we have taken away a lot of their white man's burden.
Well, that's kind of what you're proposing here. It's the ignorant Africans can't maintain their own societies.
Well, it's more to do with the fact that they don't have the infrastructure that we do, and they don't have the education level.
Yeah, but they don't have it because they ruined it by being socialists.
They didn't.
No. Honestly, there is an active rejection of Europeans in these countries, and not universally, obviously. I mean, there are countries like, for example, Botswana is a capitalist country. It's got the highest average earnings per year for each person at $17,000 a year. It's right next to Zimbabwe. Racially, these are exactly the same people, but culturally, it's completely different. Like something like 90% of Zimbabwe are unemployed. Something like that. It's a ridiculous figure.
I'm sure it's complete shit.
It's absurd. But it's literally because they're a communist country and Botswana is a capitalist democracy. And you can see the difference. It really matters.
Yeah, I'm not in favor of any dictatorial society. So of course Zimbabwe is going to be crap.
Well, yeah, but it's not just the dictatorial nature of it. It becomes dictatorial
really is.
Because it's socialist.
It really is because it's a dictatorial society.
Yeah, but the dictator
and
has an idea.
a lot of them
Oh, thanks.
use a lot of them do use socialist as a way to market that dictatorship, and that's why I'm not like some kind of revolutionary.
Yeah, but it's a core component of it. But anyway, so I'm of the opinion that they don't have a right to come to our country. We don't owe their countries anything, and it's actually good if we reduce mass immigration for the working people of this country. I think you agree with that?
I think that immigration is a symptom of a larger problem. And I think that actually it's when we don't have an immigration problem that then suddenly we have a prosperity problem.
I don't agree. I don't think that immigration is necessary to our prosperity. I mean,
No,
Britain
I think immigration is a natural result of prosperity.
Oh yeah, the desire to come into a country that
Yeah.
is prosperous from a country that's less prosperous, I completely agree. But we don't have to let them in.
Well, we are going to have to let some people in, right?
Well,
You just said
I'm
that
not
even
saying...
like 30,000 or whatever.
Well, yeah, I'm not saying we should stop immigration entirely. I mean, we can find whatever reason we want to let people in. But I think just at the moment, the numbers are just too high. And I think that that's true. I don't see why we can't agree to just reduce the number of people who come in.
I'm okay with any way to like slightly reduce the number of people coming in, but I think that that's again, it's a symptom of a larger problem, and there are ways to solve these issues that don't involve spending more money on immigration control, because immigration control does cost money.
I'm sure it does,
And
but I think it's money well spent. I think it's important we maintain the integrity of our borders. I don't think you have a country without them.
Oh yeah, of course not. We do need borders, and we do need some control over our country. But at the end of the day, like how are we gonna work with the EU? So because
we'll just arrange treaties with them as other countries outside the EU do. But thanks for coming down, man.
all right,
I'll be around all afternoon so we can talk
all right.
after this. Is
Yeah,
done.
I'm gonna go see John Wick. So
All right.
yeah,
Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks, man.
I wouldn't even vote for you.
Well, that man's going to vote for me. Hey, man, how's it going?
Is it on? Like that, yep. Cool, thank you.
What's your name, sir?
Hello, it's Cameron.
Cameron, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet
Cameron. Have I met you before?
We spoke earlier today.
Oh, right, it was earlier today, right.
I think you may have seen me at the Dankula March.
Right,
maybe.
okay, yeah. Right, what would you like to talk about?
Well, you were talking about the animal welfare parts of the manifesto, and that's
Yep.
really what I want to focus on. It's
Right,
interesting
let
that you
let me get that up then, because
Yeah.
I'm obviously in favour
Well,
of animal welfare,
I'm
but
not
I'm not an
going
expert.
I'm not going to talk about the manifesto specifically,
right,
so
okay,
you don't need
okay,
to do that. But
okay.
I think it's interesting that UKIP is one of, I think it's only UKIP and for Britain that have manifesto pledges in regards to animal welfare.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that the Green Party doesn't have anything about that.
And it's weird, isn't it? Because we're a nation of animal lovers.
Uh-huh.
You'd think that a lot of parties would be concerned about the way that battery farming happens and things like this.
Absolutely.
So I really do despise watching the thing, watching
Uh-huh.
the footage. And again, like with all things, I prefer to keep it out of sight and out of mind. But
Yeah.
again, it's something we've got to tackle head on.
Well, exactly, and that's what I'd like to do today. With
Please,
you.
please
so
do.
The question I'm going to ask you, it's a well-crafted question.
But I'm not an expert on this,
Yeah, of
so you
course,
might
yeah.
have a better answer than me.
So, well, I'd like to just focus more on the ethics of how we treat animals. So the question I'm going to ask you is, what is true of a cow that, if true of a human, would make it okay to stab humans for hamburgers? So essentially, you understand what I mean by the question?
I do agree.
Yeah.
I think the defining difference between a human and a cow is cognizance.
Cognizance. How are you using
cognition.
the word cognition?
Yeah, the ability to think.
The ability to
to
think.
reason.
Are you thinking in terms of what being able to voice reasons, or are you thinking like in terms of using the word sentience? Is that separate from
Yeah,
sentience?
I think so. Yeah, let's use the term sentience.
Okay, so obviously I would say that animals are sentient in varying degrees. Obviously you have a fly, which is
Well, it depends how we
close
define
enough
it.
to just stimulus response,
Well,
and then you have humans at the top.
I'm not sure I'd call that sentience.
Okay.
I mean, I'd call that being alive, but
Yep.
I think sentience. I think what we mean by sentience really is moral reciprocation.
Okay.
So the animal has to understand that there is a certain code
Okay.
of behavior that occurs between two animals, and this is something humans understand very, very easily, obviously, because we're what I consider to be sentient creatures.
Yep.
But I don't think animals necessarily understand that. I mean, there are pack animals in their own way that do,
Uh-huh.
but I don't think it's the same as a human being.
So what I'm hearing here is we've got sentience, what we're talking about, and then we've also got ability to reciprocate the moral values. Is that fair?
I think that's fair. Yeah.
So what I would say is, first of all, I'm differentiating between those two. I don't think those two are one and the same thing. Is that a fair distinction to make?
That's why we made it.
Okay, so what I would say with the moral reciprocation is, I'd say in the human context, we have people who are mentally incapacitated, and they themselves cannot, they can't understand the moral contract and reciprocate it.
They're not moral agents.
Yeah, so would it then be okay to stab them for hamburgers?
No, they're humans.
No, humans. So obviously here the question is, the distinction you're making is not actually distinguishing between the animals and the humans.
I can sum up very quickly. It actually is. I think we can just call this human privilege.
Human privilege.
Yeah.
So are you willfully accepting there's a double standard there where it applies to humans and not to animals?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so you were accepting the double standard.
Yes, of
course. And why would you reject double standards in other contexts?
Because in this particular context, like I said, an animal can never actually reciprocate this in any way, shape, or form.
Okay.
So there's no point us being morally consistent with people with anything that can't be consistent back to us, because animals are deterministic. They're not moral agents.
Okay.
So we can't treat them as if they are the equivalent of moral agents.
And you assume that humans who also can't reciprocate moral values are deserving of them just by nature of the fact they're human.
Yeah, I think that if we don't do that, then we go down a pretty scary path. And I think that it's not an unreasonable limiting principle to say that anything that we consider to be human, we're not going to eat.
Well, I mean, my argument would just follow that we should give moral consideration to anything that can have sentience.
Well,
because sentience is, well, what I would consider the bedrock of all morality, is that you can't have a moral dilemma without something that has experience, can you?
Well, we do give moral consideration to things that are not human, but we don't treat them as if they're moral agents.
Yeah.
Because we think they're deterministic. They don't have control of their own behavior as we would understand it. You can't imprison a dog for doing something wrong, you know. And so there's no particular reason that we should treat them like humans in this regard.
And I'm not for a second saying that we ought to treat animals as moral agents and deem them as morally responsible for their behavior, because obviously they're not. But what I'm saying is that we should give them the moral consideration of whether or not we should eat them, despite the fact it's completely unnecessary.
Well, I think that we do give them moral consideration, but I do also think it's not the same as the moral consideration we give a human. And I mean, I'm still fine with us eating animals, but I do think that the way that they're treated during their life is something that we are morally responsible for, and we should be as kind as possible in this regard. I don't see why we would ever accept the abuse of animals unnecessarily, and I don't think that butchering an animal for food is an abuse of that animal.
Okay, but if you're saying you would understand that it is unnecessary if it were that we didn't need to kill an animal for food. It would be unnecessary, wouldn't it?
It could be.
Well, I mean, it is unnecessary, though, isn't it? If we don't need to do it in order for survival, which me and you are in agreement that we can kill to survive. I would agree with you.
Of course,
on that,
and I do agree that, like, in like 200 years or something, I think that killing animals for food will probably be just phased out of life because the meat will be grown in vats and whatnot. You know,
well, I mean, lab meat will eventually take over, and then that almost solves the problem.
Well, exactly, and then unbelievably, capitalism is actually going to make the vegan paradise.
Well, yeah, I mean, we see it, and as vegans, we have access to lots of new vegan foods now because of capitalism, obviously. Yeah.
But I think the reason that people don't like veganism, and it's not. I think that like you say, you didn't approach me as a vegan. I think that's very wise, because if you present a particular issue, then you can say, like, should we have battery farmed hens or something? And everyone said, well, no, we don't have to do that.
Yeah.
But then when you say, right, okay, so following that line of logic, that means we should never eat chicken. Then that turns into a moral judgment against the people who do eat chicken, and I think they get defensive automatically.
Of course, yeah. And people tend to respond to arguments differently when they feel like they're being morally judged.
Exactly. And I think that, like, because I'm not unsympathetic to the vegan position, I mean, like, I don't want to see animals suffer, and where possible, I would rather we have like an alternative to killing an animal to eat. I mean, like vat-grown meat, for example. I'd be fine with that.
Have you tried vegan alternatives before?
I have. My wife made me eat them, and they were awful.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. We have different taste buds.
Vegan cheese is a war crime.
I'll agree with you on that one. Yeah. Okay. I'll agree with you on that. Okay.
But yeah. So but I think that a lot of vegans kind of get into a revolutionary mindset and say, right, you now have to stop eating meat because. And I don't think that's ever going to wash.
I think that's nature of veganism being very much allured by the left, and it's actually it's seen as a left-wing issue, which I take issue with myself. I think it's an apolitical, it's just an ethical position, but very much it looks nice to the left because it's another thing you can morally posture about and say, oh, look how great I am. But and if you get into that mindset of, oh, it's so evil, which I
It's
believe
easy to do.
it is evil, but if you get into that mindset of it, it's fight, then you get into that kind of radicalized state,
And
which a lot of people don't appreciate with vegans.
Yeah, and it turns off more people than it brings in, because otherwise, like, I think on the sort of like more immediate surface issues, there are a lot of things that vegans are asking for that are totally reasonable.
Yeah.
And we could easily compromise on, as long as people could say, well, that's where I'm drawing the line. I want to alleviate suffering where possible, but I'm not going to be morally browbeaten into saying I'm not allowed to eat meat.
Yeah. What I'm trying to do by having these types of conversations is try to get people to move from their own ethical positions and show how that veganism is a logical extension of those, and that through their own individual choices they should choose to follow their own ethical positions, and if they don't, then maybe change their ethical beliefs. But
I think that's good, but I really do think that you should consider the difference of moral culpability between humans and animals.
Yep.
Because I think that is a distinguishing factor that will essentially mean that we can never really treat animals as humans.
Oh, and I don't think that we should give animals moral culpability. I just think we should give them moral consideration, in the sense that because they can feel and experience, and that morality is centered around experiencing good or bad, then we should avoid enforcing animals to experience bad, and
well, I think we've got very humane ways of killing animals now, and honestly, that's one of my problems with halal slaughter.
Yeah,
it's not moral,
because it's unnecessary. It's unnecessarily.
Absolutely. I mean, if you stun an animal, so it's not going to feel pain, and then you kill it, it's over very quickly, and the animal doesn't suffer.
Yeah.
I don't see a problem with that. I actually think that's the best way we could go about this, and like you say, halal slaughter is the opposite of that. And if anyone's ever watched halal slaughter, if you've never watched it, just look it up. It's just, it's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
It's actually heartbreaking.
And I would say look up all forms of slaughter, because it's all pretty heartbreaking.
I have. I'm actually, because I wanted to know what I was doing. When it's stunned, it's not as bad as it could be. So it's
certainly better than halal slaughter. Yeah,
absolutely.
But obviously, my position is that it's all wrong.
Of course, yeah. But the question is, what happens when they prove that plants suffer?
Well, plants. I thought this one would come up. Quite interesting. Well, what I would say to you is, first of all, I would argue that generally the scientific consensus is in a disagreement with that position.
Well, no.
But
I saw a study that said the opposite. Actually, that plants actually do suffer, because and it was literally like shouting at a plant made the plant grow slower.
I think I'm familiar with the study.
Yeah,
but what I might ask you is that what do you think evolutionary advantage plants would gain from being able to experience pain?
I don't know. I have no idea.
It doesn't seem like there would be one. But anyway, I'll just humor your position and assume it's right.
Yeah. How do you resist that then?
If I assume that you're right in saying that plants feel pain, my argument would be that we should strive to kill the beings with the least sentience, and I would at least argue that plants have the least sentience, and therefore veganism would still be the most moral position, because you kill more plants killing animals than you do killing plants just in vegan diet.
What I mean is, I think there's going to be some kind of ultra veganism that comes after this, where we can't now eat like carrots or something, because we can monitor like some sort of state change within the plant, and so we all end up eating algae or something.
Oh, right.
Because whatever the least responsive. So like and I think this is the case of sort of first worldism, where this is we've solved a bunch of other problems, and so now we're worried about the morality of eating plants.
Yeah, I think it is by definition veganism is a first world problem on the basis that it requires you to be able to choose what food you have to eat.
Yes,
and a lot of people don't have that luxury.
Yeah.
And obviously I wouldn't say they were morally condemnable because they don't have a choice.
Of course.
But obviously it is a first world problem, but we're in the first world right now. So
it's true.
Now we're in the luxury to have these discussions and choose what is the most moral way to live. And to just address the algae thing. Assuming that we all agree to the fact that plants feel pain, and eventually we move towards the least sentient, that wouldn't, if you were talking practically, it wouldn't eventually lead to that, because we would have solved the issues with lab-grown meat anyway before before it ever happened. But
it's just a fun hypothetical.
I would argue that in that hypothetical, I wouldn't necessarily see a problem with that. As long as it was tasty and nothing changed specifically. Well, maybe tasty actually isn't relevant. It's wrong for me to say that.
Then we've got to ask ourselves, what kind of world are we going into? How far do we take this?
Well, how far do you take moral consideration? I don't know.
Well, that's the question, isn't it? But what I think that vegans should do, if I were to give advice to the vegan community,
I'm sure it'll be well received.
Yeah. Well, no. Well, the thing is, I'm not unsympathetic.
Yeah,
I'm genuinely not unsympathetic.
I can tell you.
You know, but I think that the key is making sure that you allow free association and free choice to be the driver behind this.
Absolutely, and that's what we're doing.
It has to be through discussion. You can't sit there and morally demand someone don't buy that steak. Because,
of course,
But the thing is, I think a lot of vegan activists actually do take that kind of tack, and I think it hurts the cause generally.
I'll just leave this as a finishing point on that. I generally agree with that. The only caveat I would have on that is that I do think it's a bit silly sometimes people to say, oh, well, eating meat is a choice, and just because it's a choice, therefore it's moral, because... just because something's a choice, like I could choose to be a racist, it doesn't make it right to be racist.
Of course, that's completely true.
Yeah.
Oh,
okay,
well,
absolutely.
Thank you very much. That was a great discussion.
Thank you.
I'll take that. Oh,
sorry.
Thank you. I tell you, I've had a few of these sort of discussions with vegans, which is why I knew how to approach that one. But they're always really nice. Like the screaming vegan activist, I think is just an internet stereotype. I'm actually yet to meet one in real life.
Quick ones for next time. From the previous conversation.
Yeah. Good point. Thanks. Right. Hello. How's it going? Yeah. What's right? So if you keep that pointed at your mouth.
Yeah.
What's your name, sir?
AJ.
AJ. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Right. What would you like to talk about?
So my question is, with the education system, you talked about the indoctrination in the education system.
Can you hold it a little bit closer?
Yeah. Teachers with their socialist points of view, parts of unions and stuff like that. What would you propose to stop this bias?
Well, the fact of the matter is but before colleges, so like middle schools and stuff, 2/3 of teachers openly vote Labour. And this is a political bias that we actually have to address. There should be rules put in place to say that the teachers can't just proselytize a political viewpoint at a closed classroom, because the teacher is in a position of authority and they do have a moral responsibility to make sure that the class actually... I mean, if they have to talk about politics for whatever reason, like the Brexit referendum or something...
History class
history, whatever it is. They have a moral obligation to represent all sides fairly. Now, a lot of the way that and honestly, I have to lay this at the feet of the left, because I find that the right-wingers... I'm a centrist, but I find the right-wingers are more likely to present the opposing view accurately than the left-wingers. And Tim Poole actually did a video about this the day before yesterday, covering it, because it was research that I think it was Jonathan Haidt had done, where he had asked conservatives in America to represent left-wing viewpoints, and then he had asked left-wingers to represent conservative viewpoints. Yeah. And the conservatives could actually represent the left-wing viewpoints accurately, but the left-wingers had no idea what the conservatives believed. And I think that that's a mindset that has essentially travelled over from the United States and has infected the Labour Party in this country, where they do honestly pathologize the opposition, and they think, well, they're bad people. They're just bad people. They're essentially Hitler 2.0. And so they find themselves, they feel they have a moral imperative to proselytize left-wing values at children when they're in school. Yeah. And I did a talk about, I talked to a 13-year-old girl in Plymouth who began the conversation by saying, I'm a woman. And it's like, that's rhetoric.
Identity
that's someone else's rhetoric.
Yeah.
It's someone else's rhetoric. Yeah. You know, when a 13-year-old comes up to you with a really, entitled attitude, pointing, going, "I'm a woman, therefore," you know that she didn't think of this herself. She got this from her teachers or from the internet somewhere, and it's something that we do have to talk about.
So I suppose, would you stop all opinions being expressed by teachers, or would you make it explicitly clear, this is my opinion, these are the facts, you make your own mind up? Would you encourage, debates?
I would prefer it if in classrooms politics wasn't brought up when not necessary. And if your physics teacher is going off about how he loves Jeremy Corbyn, that's a problem. He shouldn't be bringing this up. That's not relevant to the topic. But where, as and when political discussions should happen, all sides of the argument should be represented as accurately and fairly as possible. And I do think there's a duty to do that. I think there's a duty not to just indoctrinate them, because then they come out with like a half-formed narrative. And I know this because I've talked to loads of them. Yeah. And as soon as you start challenging them on one or two things, they go, well, I don't know. I haven't heard the other side of this argument. And then they just kind of, their position just crumbles in front of your eyes. And so it's effectively a way of deceiving people.
I think that's why you've seen the rise of new age media, people getting information from YouTube, long form discussions, because they're actually being presented the facts. the opinion isn't spun; it's just
Well,
plain.
you know, it's actually, I think it's actually the other way. And a lot of times, the opinion is very honest that it's an opinion thing, because what the media does today is they create, they inform their reporting by what they report rather than how they say it. So they'll say it in a neutral and objective way, but they will leave out some context that changes your interpretation, and they'll do this on purpose. They know exactly what they're doing, and they're very well trained at this. And so they'll write in what appears to be an impartial way, but they'll present partial facts, and so the rest of the information that the reader needs to form an overall and more impartial judgment of what's happened is actually left out in a deliberate attempt. And this has happened to me constantly. You know, he made a comment in a joke video that is always left out, because if you put it in that context, suddenly it changes the response to the entire situation. If he's telling a joke, it's clearly not the same thing. And I just want to say, right, apparently I'm under investigation. I haven't heard anything from the police. I've not heard one thing from any of the police on any of this, and yet they report it as if it's a massive investigation that's ongoing. I'm about to be put in handcuffs and taken away. It is fake news. I hate to say the term because it's, you know, a bit cliche now, but it genuinely is, and that's how they do it. They don't necessarily do it through spin, but this is the thing where with online commentators, we obviously present our own biases. You know, we're activists for things. We're not, you know, I never call myself a journalist because I'm not. I'm an activist. But the good thing about online commentators is that you have a plethora of people to listen to, and you should pick people that you like from each individual ideological camp and listen to them, because they'll give you information that the other side just don't have, because they're not focusing on it. You know, you can only see what you're actually looking for. And so to get a well-rounded view of what's going on, you've got to listen to it all.
Yep. So I think that leads on nicely to my next question about tech censorship.
Oh, yes.
So would you support any, you know, regulation on the tech industry? Would you make them declare if they're a platform or a publisher? Because that's obviously a distinct... But then it could go the other way. They could say, yes, we are a publisher, and then conservative voices just get censored. So
well, I think that's actually the way it's going. It's the European Union that is forcing Silicon Valley to declare its colours on this one, because it's Silicon Valley up until this point has existed in a kind of grey zone where we're not sure whether they're publishers or platforms, but we treat them like they're platforms. So the person who posts something is the person who is responsible for that thing being published to the world. You are the publisher, the platform is just the platform. But the European Union wishes to change this and turn Facebook, Google, YouTube, Twitter, all of the other social media platforms into the publishers, which is why Article 13 is going to require them to literally censor everything you upload, scan it through an algorithm, and then, depending on a certain set of criteria, see if it's allowed to be published to the internet, because the platform will become liable for the content that's published on it, not the people who posted it. Frankly, right, and I'm the last person who wants to defend Silicon Valley. I am the absolute last person. I hate the way Silicon Valley's run. It's a little oligopoly of very, very wealthy left-wing people. But in this case, the European Union is being unfair to them. It's not fair to try and expect Facebook to be the publisher for 2.6 billion people. It's not fair for Google, YouTube, gets something like 2 billion unique views a month and has hundreds of millions of users. It's not fair to make them the publisher. It's just an insurmountably large problem that they simply can't achieve. And so you're putting unbelievable restrictions on them in the way that they're going to have to operate, which is going to affect everyone who uses social media. Absolutely everyone who uses social media will be affected by this, and it's just being done, and nobody's really thinking about it. In fact, one of the few parties in the European Union who cares about this is the Pirate Party in Germany, and they have an MEP called Julia Redder, R-E-D-D-A, I believe it is. You should definitely follow her on Twitter, because she's the one who's been really raising the alarm about this. You know, she's very, very good on this issue, so she's definitely worth following, because she's been fighting the good fight for years now, and failing at every turn because there's an inbuilt bias in the European Union.
I have another question. I watched I think it was the 3-hour podcast of you and Milo before he came out for your tour, and I was.
Are we going to talk about plastic bags?
Yeah, we're going to talk about plastic bags.
Ban them.
So basically, I want to ask you to explain your point of view, because I couldn't really hear what you were saying with Milo. Keep interrupting you. You know, because he's a libertarian, so he doesn't want any government intervention. So.
Well, I'm sympathetic to Milo's position, and the market will eventually solve this problem. I think that there is a general understanding that having disposable plastic in the economy ends up leading to a lot of disposable plastic just being thrown away into rubbish dumps where it finds its way into the environment, into the ecosystem. And I think that everyone accepts that that's a bad thing. I mean, all the problems with microplastics in fish and whatnot now, it's obvious that this is all seeped into the ecosystem. And frankly, it's just the most disgusting thing in the world where you see, like, a muddy plastic bag in a stream or something. It's just gross, I personally don't want to see it. And so I'm doing the best I can to move away from using plastic bags. But I'm just one person, and it's one of those things that nobody seems to actually be on the other side of. The only people on the other side of not using plastic bags are the libertarian small government people who are like, well, yes, but I don't want the state doing it because we can do it. It's like, yeah, we can do it, but it's also something that there's just... Where's the pro-plastic bag lobby? Where are those people saying, no, plastic bags are a moral good. We need our plastic bags. And those people don't exist, right? And so I don't see any harm in the government saying, right, okay, we're just gonna ban the sale of plastic bags, and so people will have to, the market will find another solution, whether it's like hemp bags or cloth bags or paper bags, whatever it is. I don't care what the solution is. I think we should stop using plastic bags like this. I think, and disposable bottles maybe and things like this. I think that we've seen the effect of them. Nobody's really on the other side of the argument. I think it's okay for us to use government to do this.
Then which government would you trust to do it? I mean, the Conservative.
Well, ours, unfortunately.
Yeah. So
they're going to do a bad job of it, but a UKIP government would do a good job.
Okay. Yeah, that's basically it.
Thanks very much, man. Good questions. Hey, man, how's it going? God, aren't you warm in that coat?
Yeah, I decided the wrong.
Yeah, right. I tell you, I'm getting warm just now. Right. Would you like to take the microphone?
So,
right, point it.
Basically,
yes.
My first point is I'm very pessimistic.
Can you bring it a little bit closer?
I'm a bit pessimistic on the situation. So I believe instead of leaving the EU, I think we should all just leave the country instead.
We should leave the country.
Yeah,
would the last person in Britain turn off the lights?
Yeah, I think at this point it's so bad. I genuinely feel like we should all just leave, because then if we leave, they can't do anything to us.
Are you suggesting we become immigrants?
Yes, exactly. We don't need to move to USA or Singapore or any other country which actually has a fair tax rate. And then we solve all the issues, because then what can they do to us? They can't do anything.
Well, I agree, but I feel that that's not a very pragmatic solution.
Okay, that's fair enough. So I'll get to...
But another point, though, I get a lot of Americans saying, oh, you should, you're going to get persecuted by the government, you should leave the country, and turns out they were right. But I can't help but feel that I just don't want to leave. I don't want to run away. I don't want to just let them have our country without opposition. I really do love the country itself, like the landscape.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. I don't want to run away from that.
Yeah,
I've been to America. America is actually hideous. California is the most hideous place in the world. It's nothing but brown. It's brown like peaks and brown deserts with little knotty little grubby cactuses, and it's just ugly. It's like this is a gorgeous land.
Okay, yeah.
Sorry, I don't mean to get poetic about it, but I just don't want to. I don't want to flee.
Okay, I mean it's fair enough, but for me, when I was younger, I was lucky enough to go traveling because my dad had a job which made him travel a lot.
Oh yeah.
And so I got quite a good perspective on different countries and how they work, and seeing like Denmark, for example, and the fact I was there before the immigration stuff happened. So, and everyone was so happy. It was an amazing place. The tax rate's high, but you get good kind of rewards for it. And Singapore, it's like the future, honestly.
It's a one-party state.
Yeah, but they run it fairly.
Authoritarian capitalism for the win is what you're saying.
Okay, you're calling me that, but
no, that's what it is. I don't mean it as an insult.
Anyway, so I want to.
I mean, that's how I look at the European Union, frankly. So.
Yeah, I hate the EU. It's terrible. Yeah. But I want to get to the main point of what I think the problem is, because I don't think the immigration coming into the EU is purely just from an ideological blind standpoint of them saying, okay, the EU is just saying, oh, we need to give all these people opportunities because they're poor. That's
a lot of it's to replace the fact that there is a dearth of births in the European Union, and they're worried about pensions in 20 years' time.
Oh yeah. So the crux of the issue, I believe, is the housing market. Mm-hmm. So if we look at the UK, I think we have roughly 11.3 million people with mortgages. Yeah. And I think we have 1 in 3 families who have a mortgage. And a lot of these mortgages, they're 30 years roughly. They're going to be paid off on average when people are 69, and they're dependent on the GDP of the country and the economy of the country maintaining its growth. And the birth rate is roughly 1.7, and that's not white people. That's also the immigrants who've come over who have like a birth rate of 3.0.
Yeah.
So the problem arises when we're building more and more houses for immigrants who come across, which is like 49% Muslim, who have an extremely high rate of not working, and they can't afford the houses, so they get mortgages anyway. So you have a mass, mortgage situation of 30 years plus, people getting mortgages. The houses are increasing, but the people who actually can afford the houses are leaving. So, for example, I don't know, my girlfriend, she's studying medicine here. She's from an EU country, and she's just, can I swear?
You probably better not.
Okay. She's leaving after 5 years. She's just leaving. She's going to take, the education, it's great, and she's going to leave back because it's not beneficial to stay here. And the main issue I have is so you shouldn't let people in who are not doing a good job and they're just not helping the economy and not helping the society. But it's also attracting the right people. I feel that's the more pragmatic kind of area.
But it depends where from as well, because again, like I really don't want to poach people from the third world, because I really do feel that they need those people.
Well, yeah, but you see, they're not people. Not really poaching, in my view, because firstly, if you're a really good doctor in India, you don't come here. You go to USA because you get paid more.
Well, the West rather than just Britain. I mean, whatever Western country. But if you're a really good doctor from India, then surely those people need you. I think America can make its own doctors.
Yeah, but I think that's something which from my view, it's the law. You can't argue with it. That's just how it is. So people can move if they want to move, right? Yeah. People from India, right? If you've got an individual from India, he's a doctor. What are you going to do to him if he decides, I don't want to live here anymore? Why would you want to be?
No, you don't have to do anything, obviously. But the reason that he's leaving is not because he just doesn't like his own country.
Yeah.
He's coming to a Western country because he knows he'll make more money and he can send money home or whatever.
Yeah. So why is it our moral obligation to kind of make sure that people stay in India? It's India's obligation.
I don't think it's a moral obligation to make people stay in India.
Okay.
I think we've got a moral obligation not to exert our privilege over India.
Okay.
Because that's what we're doing when we say, look, the borders are open, we'll take as many of you as you want to come, as long as you've got a particular skill that we want, and we'll pay you more than you'll earn there. That's predatory.
But isn't that a contradiction to what you said before? Which is you've said you wanted to tax business. You wanted to reduce business tax on countries in the UK, right?
Which is temporarily because of Brexit, yes.
Okay. So roughly, if I have a business which has a 50% gross margin, at the end of all the taxes, I'll end up with roughly 22 of that 50.
Right.
If I am in Shanghai or USA, it's roughly 40 out of that 50. So, firstly, if we're establishing the rule of how the world works, if you're rich, why would you move here where your taxes are terrible and it's raining and dark 9 months of the year?
Well, hang on a second. Now you're giving sort of moral judgments and preferential judgments about the environment itself. I'm sure there are loads of people who come here because they actually like the way the country is environmentally. But this is the thing. It's about giving incentives. Like I'm not suggesting that millions of workers can move here, but business can invest here and take advantage of the human capital that we have.
But if you're doing that and you're cutting the tax rates, that's incentivizing people to move, right? But people from India...
Not necessarily to move. That's just incentivizing businesses to set up shop here.
Yeah. So
and it will also help homegrown people as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a great idea. But you're going to get people moving from India here because of the tax rate. So isn't that predatory?
Well, this is why I think that we should actually have a cap on just the number of people that we let in.
Okay.
I just don't think we should allow... I mean, like, at the moment, it's 300,000 as a net increase every year. If we cap the net increase at 30,000 and say and for everyone who comes after that and say sorry you'll have to apply next year or something like that,
right?
Maybe we could find a queuing system or something like this. I think there are ways that we could fairly distribute this, but I just don't think that it's wise for us to just say any number of people can come.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think you should. I think you should limit it.
Yeah,
but you don't need to take that many people from a country to ruin a country. You need. What I mean is that there's a very small percentage of people who are actually providing jobs and providing services and growing the economy in terms of, you have a. What I'm saying is you have a small margin of people who are doctors and engineers or highly qualified people. All you need to do is get them in. So you limit it to a small amount. But if I'm taking all those people from India, then the economy of India will suffer. They're not suffering if someone from a background in India who doesn't have an education is leaving. So you're still, in your terms, predatory on India if you're lowering the tax rate. I have no problem with
I'm not saying that. I wouldn't describe that as predatory as it was, because I think that the intention is to reduce the number of people who come here. So reduce the loss of human capital from India, and not just India. I mean, Poland, Lithuania, Romania, all of these other countries that, again, where the country is aging because we're sucking the young people out of them. Yeah. And I think that that's bad for that country, and I think that's also bad for our country, really. But it's very good for the managerial class of the country. It's very good for the progressive class of the country who feel very, very morally justified. But I think that if we put a direct cap on it, that's the opposite of being predatory. I mean, there might be a small number of people that come, because I don't want to shut off immigration completely, but I think that even if it is still, if you could put it on a scale and say, right, at the moment we're at 10, we're going down to a 4, I still think that's an improvement from being at the 10 if what we're going to consider what we're doing to be predatory as predatory. At least reducing the extent to which we do it is a good thing.
Okay, so now I kind of understand what you mean, so I can kind of say what I want to say.
Please, yeah.
So what I predict is going to happen if you don't cut the tax rates for a long period of time. You said a short period of time. I think it should be a long. Is what's going to happen? The narrative at the moment is that it's Brexit's fault.
Yes.
That everything's happening. It's not Brexit's fault. It's the government's fault of how they're dealing with it. It's
Completely agree.
It's like a parent giving a child homework and then the child coming back with the homework and saying, "Oh, I got 0 out of 10 because the homework's hard." Yeah.
Well, no, you're absolutely right. And this is what businesses have been screaming about, saying, "Look, give us a decision. Just give us a decision." Because and luckily, 80% of businesses now are ready for no deal Brexit. Yeah. So I think we can actually just cut the cord and be done with it. Thank God.
But the thing is what people are going to do? They're going to blame Conservative government. Then they will lose seats, but Labour will win seats because most people kind of don't pay attention politically, and they think there's only 2 parties to vote for.
Yeah.
So they'll vote for Labour. Corbyn's going to get in. Corbyn is the Antichrist, basically.
Agreed.
So
actually, no, that's not fair to Corbyn, right? Corbyn is just a useful idiot. John McDonnell is the Antichrist.
Yes. Yeah,
he is the dangerous man in the Labour Party.
He's he's terrible.
Yeah, Corbyn's just an idiot.
They're very, very, very left wing, and they will raise tax rates even more.
Absolutely.
So we are already. You said some people will move here because they like the environment.
Sure.
Most people prefer, you would agree, a sunnier option if they were really rich.
Most Brits would, but you don't know that people who come from those environments are necessarily looking for that.
I don't know. Okay, well,
anyway, it's irrelevant.
So you've got an area where the tax rates are going to be even higher, even though we're already one of the worst tax places in the world for what we get in return. The NHS is completely useless in the way it's organised. You know, we have a problem with obesity, and all the money is going towards there.
Yep.
My girlfriend, who's in medicine, she's completely all the time being told that 90% of her job is just going to be looking after obese people, and they're going to cut everything else because they can't afford it. And then on top of that, you've got the immigration coming in, and it's just going to cost us even more money in benefits because they're not working.
Yep.
So you're living in a country, you're a millionaire. Let's say you're a millionaire, and you own a company.
Oh, I'd leave. If Jeremy Corbyn got in charge, I'd leave. And they're looking at the rich list is going to flee.
Exactly. So why would you stay? Like, what if that's going to happen? Because that is going to, in my opinion, there's no way in hell Corbyn's not becoming the Prime Minister.
Maybe I'm looking forward to the inevitable revolution.
Well, it's like, if you're a millionaire, you're literally working, you're waking up every morning, paying for people who can't be bothered to get up their asses.
I agree.
Right? And you're in bad weather the entire time. And you're also, they're not particularly proud of your country because you can't even hang a flag on your... I had a flag on where I live, and it got told to be taken down.
Well, who told you to take it down? Was it the local council?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I had another woman in Plymouth said exactly the same story. She put a British flag up, just the Union Jack. It wasn't even an England flag. Yeah. But the local council came along and demanded that she take it down because it might be offensive.
Yeah.
And it's like, how... And I went to Gibraltar about this, right? In Gibraltar, British flags everywhere, wall to wall, because they're right next to Spain and they're worried about the Spanish all the time. And they're very British. They're very firm in their British identity. And all I got from the Gibraltarians was, do you not fly British flags in England anymore? And I was like, no. No, it's become weird to do so. And this is why in my videos now, I've actually got a table covered in an England flag now. I mean, you know, normally that's associated with football these days. I don't pay attention to football, but I am an Englishman, and God damn it, I'm not going to be told that this is a racist flag. I'm just not having it. You know, so I think we've got to start taking it back.
Yeah.
And just being unashamed of the fact that we have this flag. It's ours, man.
Exactly. So if that's going to happen, which I'm pretty sure it is, and all the rich people will leave, then all the jobs will become unavailable.
Things will get bad,
yeah.
yes.
And then imagine if 1 in 3 families have mortgages and they can't make the payments because, you know, their job's gone because the government has taxed too much and the rich have left.
Thanks,
We're in a
Labour.
situation where the housing market crashes.
Yep.
Housing market is roughly £1.3 trillion. The whole system will collapse completely. And everyone will be running around manic trying to fix their lives out,
Yep.
you know, because the financial system is corrupt.
Can I just summarise what I think you're saying here?
Right.
Labour are going to ruin the country.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, but the country is already ruined, in my view.
Don't get me wrong. The
Yeah.
Conservatives have made a pretty bad job of it.
Yeah.
But I think that at this point we could still salvage it. But I think that I think you're absolutely right. I think Labour are legitimately going to ruin the country,
Yeah.
as the socialists have in every other place that they've tried it.
Indeed.
They just keep messing it up. And I don't want to have to keep agreeing with you. So I guess thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Really
Good
appreciate
talking
it.
to you.
Right, before we have anyone else over, is it alright if I take like 2 minutes to stand up and stretch my legs? And is there anyone who can make me a roll up? If us, yeah. Oh, thank you very much. Sorry, come on. How long have I've been doing this for a while? Let me have 5 minutes, and I've got to take this top off as well. It's boiling. So I've just heard that there's Antifa somewhere. Can anyone see them? Which ones? The chap with long hair. What, the champagne socialist? Oh, thank you so much. Thank you, man. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Oh, yeah, of course. If you... Yeah.
Alex.
Hi there, Agent White Whiskers. Nice to meet you for the second time. Enjoy the smoke. Increases pattern recognition, logical deduction, and memory retention. May I take a seat? Excellent. Thank you. So...
Oh, God. Here we go.
This is going... So, today, good sir, I would... Yeah, don't you worry. So, sir, I have...
They're going to start doing...
It's just Callum, mate. It's all right.
They're going to start doing the interpretive dance thing. So
Right, okay, so the folks over there are going to do some interpretive dance, so this was a good time to take 5 minutes. They asked us if we'd stop broadcasting for just the period where they're going to do their little dance, and of course we said, sure, why not? You know, it means I can have 5 minutes. But we'll just carry on as soon as they're finished, I guess. But tell me when I have to stop.
I think they're setting up now, and they just told us to set it up. I need a word with you.
Okay, I'll be back.
Phone, by the way. It's gone missing over the prior
Okay.
minute.
All right, hang on a second. I'll be back in 2 seconds, everyone.
Whilst we're on the little interlude, I just want to do something very democratic. Put your hands up if you're a computer gamer. Right. Now, keep your hands up if you have the best console in the world and you're a PlayStation fan. The rest of you are all heathens. What's up, little man?
I like it.
You like it?
Yeah, I like it.
Are you a PlayStation fan, yeah?
So who's got a PC then? Hands up. Now apparently they're the best. Lovely. You're just a bit of a mug. Sorry about that, mate, earlier on. Anymore. I love you. All right, we'll stop. Shit. So who's for communism around here then, eh? Hands up. That's like, yeah. Socialism? UKIP? Result? Right. Oh, you're going to say something, mate?
Just for all the people who are not you, I was born into Islam. I'm employed at the moment as a paramedic. Both my parents are migrants to this country. I served in the British forces for 22 years. Now you might not think I should not be proud to be British, but what I am is grateful. I am grateful that I was born in this country, that my parents decided to have me here. I was British before I even took a breath. So that's not an achievement in my view. I'm proud of my achievements, but I am grateful. And do you know who made this country that I'm enjoying now? Your parents, your grandparents, your great-parents, and all the people in your family who you don't even know the names of, made those buildings, made this infrastructure, made the NHS that kept me safe and alive and looked after my parents. My parents, both foreign, spoke English in the home, made sure that I got clipped around the ear when I stepped out of the line, because as far as they were concerned, my dad being from an Islamic country, if I commit wrong, I shame the family. So I got a cuffing from him, and I deserved it. Mother being German, same deal. So I'd be in care by now, you know. So all I want to do is, if your grandparents, great-grandparents are alive, just mention that the child of migrants says thank you to them for creating this great country that I've been able to enjoy.
Why don't cuss? Right.
I just wanted to say that I've actually met Vladimir Bukovsky many years ago at a court case, and he says he has lived in our future.
Don't look at me, I ain't got a clue. So, what? I'm fat. Right, so nothing to demonitor. Alex, do you want to... You've got a YouTube channel, haven't you?
Well, it got nuked 2 days ago. My YouTube channel got nuked 2 days ago. My name is Alexander Sangmore. I serve as a content creator and lead archivist for an independent media group called The Reality Report, logo here and here. And we essentially talk about things that the mainstream media refuses to either talk about or to even acknowledge, because we live in an age of utmost political correctness. And we face a great degree of political persecution. And I have prepared today some questions for Mr. White Whiskers, Sargon. And genuine questions that I believe that the electorate should know about, certainly. Thank you for the microphone, good sir. Now, it depends. The Reality Report is an independent media organization that primarily consists of British patriots, nationalists. We occupy a centre-right, the centre-right on the political spectrum, and suffice it to say, grassroots organization, growing particularly quickly. We have other affiliate organizations, such as Antifa Public Watch, which are presently experiencing a degree of algorithmic deboosting of beyond 99% on Facebook. Now, what this specifically means is that last time I checked, they had 17,000 or so followers on Antifa Public Watch London, and they made a post. It was up for 4 hours, and the amount of people who viewed the post out of 18,000 followers was 2 people. After 4 hours, the algorithmic deboosting that the alt-left Silicon Tech Valley Alliance is forcing on the world is so extreme that it is beyond 99% algorithmic deboosting of content uploaded. This is something that we have forwarded to the president since he has created an email, a mailing website where you all, if you have archives of every single case that you have been censored or deboosted or politically censored and so forth, send it over to the Trump administration and see what he can do with the sum of information that is provided to him. Beyond that, I'm here today because Mr. Sargon represents someone who has the testicular fortitude to stand for freedom of speech, freedom of expression in this country, the freedom to make jokes, okay? We don't want to be like other nations that have morality police, and only the other day I saw a a Scottish, I believe, reporter who was threatening and intimidating someone from the Netherlands, if memory recalls accurately, because he wasn't of the accurate political persuasion. Now, when the media act like the Stasi secret police and try to threaten and intimidate people, we remember what CNN did to that teenager who posted a picture of Trump bodying CNN in a meme. The media is particularly desperate to shut down every single one of you here, and it's really quite fascinating. They're trying very hard. Facebook has lost 40 billion in stock value over the last few months. YouTube lost $70 billion, okay, last month. Yes. Thank you all for attending today.
Sorry, we just got to be quiet for 2 minutes for them. Mine's a Stella. All right, thanks.
You're going to like this one. I'll send that to you later. Oh.
Very, very, very
good. I'll send it to you later.
Very good. Yes, sir. It is, I'm a representative of both the Reality Report and 4chan Politically Incorrect. I have a team of Kekinati Digit and Reality Weavers. Your content, by the way, is consistently archived across multiple websites, such that it never gets completely taken down.
Well, do let 4chan know that I salute all of their efforts in the culture war.
Will do, sir. By the way, I have created an audio version of the UKIP Interim Manifesto. I spoke with Mr. Batten approximately a week ago, and he told me that there may be an opportunity to put the full UKIP manifesto after its interim, after the 23rd. I'm also fairly happy today that the milkshake marauders haven't shown up, because I was quite worried, because to them, myself and the Reality Report and yourself, this is one of the questions that I will be asking. They consider you thought leaders, and myself a thought leader, and the Reality Report a thought leader that must be shut down. So
Yeah, you're talking about homelessness, mate. See that van? I live in it quite a lot. And I was 8 months in a van and 3 months in a car. So I understand about homelessness. Yeah. No, hang on a minute.
What's up, mate? What's up? Chap at the back, would you like to have a chat? Would you like to have a chat? You just want to shout? Come on, come over and have a chat. Look, I'll give you a mic. I'll give you a mic. Hey, man.
No.
Okay, well, hang on a sec.
I don't shake hands.
Okay, well, sorry, man. Do you mind if I talk to this chap first? Right, I'll give you your own microphone. Hey, come on. That's not yours. Come on, that's not yours.
by all means, that costs £1, but the publicity is worth 1,000.
Okay, well, hang on, right. So, if you can give me 2 seconds, I'll talk to this chap first. Okay, well, we'll sit down, I'll give you a microphone, and then, yeah, well, that's how we're going to do it. So you can either agree to that or you can leave.
Let me speak?
I will, if you'd like to take a seat and take a microphone.
I don't want to sit down.
Why not?
I'll just sit here, yeah?
Okay, well, here you go.
I'm going to go, everyone. All I have to say is love each other.
Good advice. Why did we have to be so confrontational about it? I feel that we could have sat down and had a reasonable conversation about the subjects. Right, where was that? Oh, there you are, sir. Thank you about that. Sorry about the delay.
No worries. All right.
When he says love one another, probably not right here, right now, just for the decency of it, if that's okay.
Screw it. Let's put it
Right.
here. Okay. So, Sargon.
Right, what was your name, sir?
Yeah, my name is Alexander Sangmore.
Nice to meet you.
I mutually so, sir. So I
serve as a archivist and content creator for the Reality Report independent media group, and I was looking to ask you some questions today concerning various topics. So I won't stay on the questions. I'll just get to it.
Okay.
So. No one has gone for the Switzerland deal or mentioned it so far. Switzerland is not a member of the European Union, but get free trade. Would you be in favour of getting the same deal as Switzerland post-Brexit?
Yes, but they can't give it to us.
They can't give it to us, I know, but it is possible.
That would be a wonderful deal, yeah.
It demonstrates the hypocrisy of treating us as such.
You're absolutely right. And you can compare that to the Norway deal, where they have something similar but have to accept free movement. So the EU does do a kind of a la carte by arrangement deals, and then when they come to us, they say, "Oh no, we don't do that." Well, yes, they do. They're just lying.
It demonstrates a degree of hypocrisy, and internally contradicting policies.
It does, but I always hate having to go to hypocrisy as a criticism, because frankly, everyone is in some way a hypocrite, and every set of values has internal contradictions. I think it's more powerful when you just point out they're obviously lying to us when they say they don't do that, because they do that. So,
I see. Thank you. Will UKIP reform the left-leaning police to be politically neutral, and specifically, what measures and policies would you recommend be implemented to this end?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm the one constantly banging the drum about this in UKIP, saying our institutions are becoming politicized. Honestly, it's left-wing activists. For example, and I love bringing up Harry Miller, Harry the Owl, who is a trans-exclusionary radical feminist. So not necessarily someone with which I share much in common, but he got a visit from the police because he had liked or retweeted, I can't remember which one it was, a TERF limerick. And in this, it was essentially a biologically essentialist statement saying men are men and women are women, and the biology lines up with what they become. He got a visit from the police, who wanted to, quote, check his thinking on this, because the police had some kind of diversity training, and this had put this into their heads, and now suddenly they were monitoring TERF activity on Twitter. This is obviously a politically motivated issue. This is obvious. I personally would go full Bolsonaro on the issue and just defund any kind of diversity initiatives, any kind of diversity training, because frankly I see them as a front for this kind of neo-Marxist infiltration.
As a means of the public fighting against the non-police neutrality that is clearly aligned with progressive intersectional agendas,
yes,
would you deem it a prudent decision for the public to collate or to have a place where they can send archives of their experiences with police such that they can be named and shamed?
I'm not sure about naming and shaming in particular, but I totally agree that the public should, if they feel they're being mistreated, film their interactions with the police. Because I don't think the police should be the opponents of the public, obviously, but I think there are definitely police who have been given an ideological agenda that they frankly don't understand. They're not equipped to understand it, and it's not expected that they should understand it, but they are now being tasked with effectively enforcing this on the rest of us. There are already places that do this sort of thing. Crime Bodge is a great one for police as a police watchdog. And in America, there's a YouTube channel, Facebook page called "Film Your Marxist Professors," where they ask students that if their professor is trotting out communism as the answer to all of life's problems, film it and send it to them so it can be demonstrated that this is happening. Because otherwise, this happens behind closed doors with a captive audience, and that's very dangerous. That's why I think so much indoctrination is coming out of these institutions.
Thank you. With the EU trying to form an EU army, many, including yourself, have commented that they are trying to form an economic, political, and military sovereign state. Is Germany trying their luck with an attempt at a Fourth Reich? Would you care to expand on your thoughts on this? Where will we see ourselves in 6 to 9 months in the case scenario that they continue with this authoritarian tendency?
Well, the answer is just yes. This is Germany's attempt to take over Europe once again. You can see this in the way it's treating Greece. It's actually taking certain Greek islands as collateral for the failure for Greece to repay its debts. Nobody wants to talk about it, but Germany is buying up Europe because it didn't manage to do this through force of arms.
I actually was raised in Greece between the ages of 6 to 17, and they have turned Greece into an economic debt slave.
Yes.
The International Monetary Fund specifically, and the European Union.
Yes, and just to be clear on this, it's because Greece can't leave the euro. There's no legal mechanism for Greece to leave the euro. And that means that the Greek people either have to become as economically powerful as the Germans or forever be their serfs. And it's obviously the Greeks are never going to become Germans in that way. So effectively, Greece has become a kind of just a colony of Germany in that way, an economic colony.
It is also particularly problematic that Greece has a rising, genuine neo-Nazi party called the Golden Dawn, rising for opposition to the European Union. You do not want to push people so far such that they actually adopt ethno-nationalist policies and so forth. Anyway, next question.
That's absolutely the problem. There needs to be credible, centrist, liberal opposition to the things that are being done, because we recognize that they're wrong, and for some reason we feel, oh, well, we can't say or do anything about this. No, not only can we must. We must be the alternative, because otherwise, like you say, you get very scary people, and because they're the only ones addressing the issue, they're the ones who get the support. We have to take that place instead of them, because we don't want those people rising.
Agreed. Next question. What do you think of members of governments who are promoting cultural deconstructivism by proclaiming that Europe has no native culture? Examples cited are Swedish culture minister, German Chancellor Angela Merkel, and Francis Macron, all proclaiming that France, Sweden, Germany, etc. have no native culture. What are your thoughts on this? This trend of cultural deconstructivism specifically?
I noticed that it always comes from childless, unmarried people who have spent their lives in academia and not in their own households. I think that anyone with children would say the complete opposite. And any foreigner who comes to Britain, England particularly in this regard, also is well aware that we have a native culture, that we are a people, and whenever I go to any other countries, I recognize that they have a native culture too. This is part of a radical left-wing open borders agenda that is specifically designed to erase the nation state and the constituent cultures that reside therein. I think we have to resist it. And the way to resist it is actually with family values. And I'm very libertarian in this regard. I don't think we should force anyone to do anything. And I never thought I'd end up preaching how the use of family values for the integrity of a civilization, but we are here, and it's true, and we do have to do this.
Thank you. I feel that this trend of cultural deconstructivism is particularly dehumanizing for the native populations. What is your opinion on this?
Oh, expand on how you feel it's dehumanizing. It's a very interesting way of putting it.
Certainly. So the idea is that certain native cultures have certain embedded characteristics that have been with them for centuries. And seeing a trend of decivilizationism, detraditionalization, and dechristianization in the nations that are ruled by the EU bureaucrats, I find that their tendency to undermine, insult, demean, and otherify the things that are inherent to a culture and its people is dehumanizing, because culture is an aspect of the identity of a people's, and diminishing that identity is also diminishing
their
who
sense
they
of
are.
self, isn't
yes,
it?
their sense
It's
of
their
self
sense of
and
self,
who
yeah.
they are, what they stand for, what they represent. That is how I would classify it as specifically dehumanizing.
That's a really, really interesting way of putting it, and I can't really see much there that I would disagree with. And in fact, it reminds me of a conversation I watched between Margaret Thatcher and a Swedish journalist, where the Swedish journalist was effectively trying to deconstruct Margaret Thatcher's pride in being British, and she was using the Nazis to do it, and Thatcher just turned around and said, well, I'm sorry that your people surrendered to the Nazis. I'm sorry you were less capable of defending your democracy, defending your cultural integrity, but we are not going to be ashamed of the fact that we were able, just because you feel bad that your country capitulated. Like the lady who came around earlier and was shouting about how the Europeans must pay the price for having a successful history. No.
This
we
is
don't.
emotional blackmail.
Yes, and what kind of person tries to strip someone else's identity away? Because what you're doing there when you do that is you're trying to isolate them and cut off any of their support structures, their social structures, their own personal connection to the culture that they come from, and you try to isolate them so they're more easily manipulated. Frankly, I view it as an evil thing to do, and I do not use the term evil very lightly. I'm very rare to use that, but I do find that to be predatory and pernicious, and something that has to be resisted at all costs. Because as far as I'm concerned, they will take these things away from you if you give them the opportunity, which is why we have to fly a flag. I'm not a natural flag flyer, but in times like these, we need them.
I would like people to have courage, confidence, and conviction, and to go to the ballot box because it sends a message. It is something that I have repeatedly said, and I think that that is the only way that we are going to solve this issue peacefully.
I totally agree with you.
And it's the way that we should.
All of this can be solved at the ballot box. All it requires is certain decisions being made that are not outside of the scope of our political environment, that don't require us to violate any human rights or hurt anyone, or even, we don't even have to necessarily be offensive about it. We can just go there and say, these are our convictions and this is what we're voting for.
Thank you. So, how do you believe we should best celebrate and safeguard British culture and heritage with such militant opposition and hatred from the modern left?
Honestly, it's just moral fortitude that we require. All we have to do is say no. When they say, oh, you have to take that down, that's racist, we can say, well, no. This is my property, this is my heritage, this is my flag, I'm going to fly it.
Stand for it.
Yes. Yes. We just stand for it. That's
Thank
absolutely
you.
right. Because... And I think it's important that we make sure that we know what we're standing for, because it's really not just a cloth. There is a system of values that we have, that we all share, that are implicit within this. And when they turn around and say to you, but what are British values anyway, as you know they're going to do, you say fairness. Because this is not a universal value. It is a particularly and peculiarly British value. In Germany, it's conformity. In France, it's envy above whoever's above you and the need for perpetual revolution. But in Britain, it really is about fairness. And then once they bring you down to what's the core value, you can build on that. So what is fair? I mean, that's the reason, in my opinion, that the English revolt at the idea of a poll tax. It's not fair to ask people who don't earn money to pay taxes. That's the core problem with the poll tax. And it's poll taxes that back in the 14th century got Wat Tyler leading a revolution, and it was the poll tax that got Margaret Thatcher getting a bunch of riots in the streets in the 80s. You know, it's a deeply unfair thing, because I really do think that the British character is based on the value of fairness. And again, you can go to any Islamic country and they won't even mention the word fairness. Go to communist China and ask them if they think fairness is important. But it is important in the Anglosphere. In the English-speaking world, fairness is our primary value. It's what that flag stands for. Don't let them take it away.
Thank you. If you were to be the education minister for Britain, what Don't consider it out of the question, good sir, the way that things are going presently. But what qualities and virtues would you like to see in Britons made manifest?
I think that, yes. Well, I was about to go on to that, actually. Exactly. I think that I would have a mandatory civics class to teach people about the political history of Britain, why it's important and why it's good, because it genuinely is good. Because if Britain is responsible for almost everything that we consider to be laudable about Western democracies. It isn't the French or Germans that invented this. It's not the Spanish or the Italians. It's the Brits. And we should take ownership of these things. Say, no, they're our inventions. Individual liberty, free speech, democracy in its modern form, constitutional democracy. These are our ideas that we see manifested most purely in the United States. These are British innovations. They are not German. They are not French. We should be proud of these. We should be proud of the common law. The common law is your friend, you know? In France, it's not like that. So we really have to start putting in young people's heads, look, the country you live in is a good thing. It's good. You know, the alternatives are way worse. The alternatives are awful, which is why so many people from around the world want to come here. You know, and we should be exporting these ideas, not imperialistically. We don't need to conquer anyone. I think we can do all of this via persuasion. We can just go up to them and say, listen, here's a way that you might not have thought of. Consider trying doing it this way. It works for us. We think it can work for you too.
So appreciating British culture, heritage, tradition, etc., as well as standing for it, actively standing for it, not just in words, but in actions at the ballot box.
Correct.
Yes. Excellent.
Correct.
Next question. What is your position on the sovereignty of our territorial waters, and what would UKIP do to protect them from foreign fishing fleets?
I think you know the answer. I think that
Okay,
they're our
excellent.
sovereign territorial waters, and we have a navy.
Excellent. This here is a question from Vinnie Sullivan, the founder of The Reality Report.
Yes.
How do you feel about the grassroots movements of the DFLA at home and the Yellow Vest abroad around you, and can you remark on their successes and failures?
Yes, I can. The Yellow Vests were successful in getting Macron to repeal his fuel tax. I believe that now they are just essentially a common revolt against the imperious presidency that he has going on. The DFLA, I'm actually not as familiar with, to be honest. They don't seem to make the news as much, probably because they're not as dramatic as the Yellow Vests. But I very much like their slogan, which is just against all extremism. I think that's fantastic. I think they're working class expressions of political frustration. I think these are communities that are not listened to. I think they're told that they're bad people when they raise their objections because they don't. The objections they had don't fall into the morally acceptable boundaries from the Westminster Consensus. You are allowed to talk about these issues, and if you have an issue outside of that, you're a racist. And I think that it's very dangerous to allow that to proliferate, to continue, because these people's problems are not going away, and I don't even know where we derive the moral authority to ignore them. You know, they are tax-paying citizens. They're our countrymen. Why would we just tell them that they're bad? You know, surely we have a duty to listen to that.
I see. Thank you. Is it not hypocritical, internally contradicting, and ironic that the left seems to support the IRA, who are, by the left's own standards, white nationalists?
Yes, but I'm not surprised that the left have found a massive internal contradiction in their own philosophy yet again.
Surprise,
Yes.
surprise.
I'll contain myself there. But it's a good point. I mean, in a way, you literally could call the IRA white nationalists.
Well,
it's just an amusing way of framing it, isn't it?
Do you believe Tony Blair's involvement in actively subverting Brexit by advising Macron and Merkel on how to negotiate is treason?
I think Tony Blair is responsible for a lot of treason. I think that's the least of his crimes, frankly. I think that he's I think that he was aware. There was a biography written about Tony Blair where he was alleged to have said that he wants to open the borders to create a voting demographic for Labour. He ordered the rest of his party not to mention this because obviously it sounds unbelievably bad. And in the Telegraph the other day, it was published that he apparently didn't realise the numbers that would come. He knew that the Iraq War was probably not true, and he went with it. The justification for it was probably not true, and he went with it anyway. And honestly, there's a few years ago, I think it was 2017, he did an interview with, again, I think it was the Telegraph and the Independent, where he said, look, there are millions of people in the Islamic world who have values that are just fundamentally incompatible with the modern Western democracies that we live in. And he doesn't know what to say or do about this, but at least he can recognize that he did this. And that's the thing. Tony Blair is the man who has led us to this point, and we must never forget that. So anything that comes out of that demon's mouth should be treated with a great deal of skepticism, and God willing, one day, he will see justice. Should we make that the last one? Because I think there are other people waiting.
Certainly. Would you have time for one more, sir?
Go on, very quickly.
Very quickly. Should Mike Stutchbury be the poster boy for morbid obesity awareness in the United Kingdom?
I don't think he has a choice.
Thank you ever so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
Much appreciated.
No problem, thank you. There were some amazing questions. I'm really pleased with those. Thanks for coming down, man.
Anytime.
Oh, hang on a sec, Luke. He's just going to grab his bag. Hi, Luke. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Right, you got to hold it quite close.
Oh, okay, like this?
Yes. What would you like to talk about?
I would like to know about...
Oh, sorry, yeah. Let him grab his stuff first. Yeah, you've got to talk directly into it.
All right.
Great.
I would like to know about UKIP's stance on pollution, like the various types, like sea pollution, air pollution, and ground pollution.
Well, that's good question.
Thank you.
What UKIP wants to do is separate the dogma of anthropogenic climate change from the actual reality of the pollution and from what they call environmentalism.
Yeah.
So actually talking about the result of mismanaging the environment. This is why I keep getting into trouble for wanting to ban plastic bags. I don't really care why global warming's happening. I don't really care why pollution's happening. What I care about is what we can do to stop it. And I think this is a view that's widely shared in UKIP. You know, the philosophical arguments behind it are a bit irrelevant when we can actually take concrete steps to actually try and solve things. The main problem that we have, for example, say pollution in the oceans. I'm sure you're aware of the giant trash pile in the middle of the Pacific, for example.
Yeah.
We don't control the countries that comes from. And so there's very little that we can actually do to solve that problem. But I do think in our own green and pleasant land, we should be responsible stewards of the land, because we're going to hold that down, hand that down to our children and your children's children.
Yeah.
They're going to have to live here. And so I think it is incumbent on us to do what we can to be environmentally conscious. One thing I personally keep pushing is nuclear power. It's a clean form of energy. It doesn't require us to build all over the hills and countryside, and it would actually be a productive way of solving a lot of problems with one particular issue.
Yeah, I would say that a problem with nuclear power is the waste it produces.
It is, yeah, that's true.
Yeah, because there's this plant in Norway, somewhere up in Scandinavia, that's going to be dug under the ground. They're going to seal it up in 2110. And then just leave it, but that still is going to be radioactive for thousands of years.
Sure, but it's going to be thousands of miles away from any kind of human habitation, isn't it? So
yeah.
It's not without its flaws, but I think considering the alternatives, it's the best choice that we have.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Right, would you like to come and... Hello. Very well, thanks. What's your name, sir?
My name's Finn.
Finn, nice to meet you, Finn.
Nice to meet you, Carl. 2 seconds, I'm just gonna...
Yeah, no problem.
It's a bit surreal, actually. I'm mostly kind of used to seeing you in the corner of a screen being nasty to people.
Well, I don't think I'm being nasty.
No, they've all been cunts, I agree.
Yeah, I think they had it coming.
Stage
probably
fright.
shouldn't swear though.
Oh yeah, I do apologize. Yeah, being a
I know,
trainee journo as well.
Trainee smear merchant.
That's the one. That's the one. I won't bring up Jess Phillips. Anyway,
that's all right.
So first question.
Yes.
What do you think of the mainstream media and the future of what it holds? As in, do you think it's going to crumble? Do you think that it's going to continue? Like, what's your opinion?
Yeah, I think the mainstream media is essentially bolstered by the people who like to believe the narrative they spin, and then the sort of older generation who still believe the media is credible on the face of it because of the tone in which they write, rather than considering the things that they write. And I think that the media, the journalists themselves, are very aware of their position as gatekeepers. They're very aware that they are the opinion setters of the country. And that's why they hate the alternative media so much. They do view us as a challenge to their authority. And I think that that's not going to stop. And in fact, I think the attacks will get worse and worse and worse. And honestly, a lot of the way that I deal with the media is to make them even more ridiculous. Because the quicker we get to that end point of them just shrieking hysterically at anyone who's against them, the better. Because people need to see them for what they are.
Oh, I'd agree entirely. So assuming that... the mainstream media does collapse and something comes to replace it, how do you put something in place to ensure that it doesn't just repeat itself and institutions aren't just formed and,
There's no way of preventing that. Unfortunately, I think this is a kind of generational cycle. I mean, like, for example, you see it with the Catholic Church. When the printing press was first invented, people could read what was in the Bible.
Well, they didn't want that because they can't,
Because
can't
they
tell
were
them
the
what to do.
gatekeepers, and they were the thought They were the thought creators, the thought leaders in the churches and the pews. They were the ones telling people, look, these are the opinions, the sanctioned opinions. And then suddenly when people could read the Bible for themselves, say, well, you're making this up. This is not in here. You're abusing your position of influence. And the media has become like the Catholic Church. It's very much taken the same tack.
Inquisition as well, the whole tactics.
But yes, actually, that's a good point. But they've adopted the same kind of social role as opinion setters. And after people like myself, we'll get to a point where we've become corrupt and interested in preserving our own narratives and power in the face of a changing world that demands change from us. And if we're smart, we'll change to meet that demand. We won't do what the media did and the church did previously. But, I mean, to be honest with you, that'll be in like 15, 20 years' time. And honestly, I imagine that we're not going to be that smart. So, in 20 years' time, I'll probably be the one who's getting called out by whatever the thing that comes after me is. But I'll do my best.
To that day.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I'll hopefully I do my best to be accountable to the people who listen to me. So
I would say very much so. Yeah, I would agree entirely. So my other question was, do you remember that woman the other day, Margaret? I can't remember where it was from, but
in Plymouth.
The very impassioned speech. Yeah. So she was talking about the British identity being erased.
Yes.
Specifically, do you think there's any like force that's causing that, or do you think there's like a group in particular?
Absolutely. Yeah, the postmodern academic left. This is being done in universities. This is why Dr. Kahindi Andrews, a professor of African studies at the University of Birmingham.
Is this the English flag is racist?
The English flag is it's not just as racist, it's the most racist, which is ironic because it's the English identity, the English individualism that is the progenitor of anti-racist thought.
Well, yes, the trendsetter abolishing of slavery and all that. Yeah.
Absolutely. So to sit there and then declare that because a Nazi has waved the flag once, that it's a racist flag it's so backwards.
Oh, I agree entirely as well. You look at the Belgians, what was it, the rubber Holocaust, which was only, like, I think, 80 years ago, slightly before the First World War, and no one remembers it, unfortunately, because... Yeah, anyway.
And I mean, you've got like Monroe Bergdorf, who was an advisor to Jeremy Corbyn, saying that the white race is the most evil and oppressive race in history. I mean, if this isn't an attack on our native identities, I don't know what is. I don't know what I would describe as an attack if this doesn't look like it.
Yeah. So like moving on again in the same kind of pattern. So you were saying earlier that multiculturalism and Islam is something we have to accept as part of UK culture now.
Okay, so let me call you up on the term multiculturalism.
Not multiculturalism.
Because I really hate this term, right? Because, and then there are several reasons why the term multiculturalism is demonstrably pernicious, right? To start with, it links culture to race, and I think that that's not necessarily true. I think that there are people who grow up in foreign cultures who are not of the same race of the people around them, but still become of that culture. It's the way they think, the way they view the world. And so if we say multiculturalism when what we mean is multiracialism, we are falling into the same trap that, frankly, the neo-Nazis use, because they believe that culture and race are inextricable. They believe that it's only a biologically German, pure-blood, that can actually become a German person, whereas that's not true. You obviously get all sorts of foreigners who move to Germany and become culturally German. So I think that's we shouldn't accept the framing of multiculturalism. But then you've got to ask yourself, well, what does that really mean? Because then what you're saying is a culture is a set of values and a set of social expression. And I don't agree that anyone should live in a deliberately multicultural society because, A, that's top-down planning of society. And what that means is if one culture starts interacting with another culture, you get a point of conflict, and that has to be resolved via personal negotiation between the people from that culture so they can become normal to one another. They can be used to one another, and they'll change slightly because of their interaction, and I'll change slightly because of my interaction with you, and eventually we'll come to an understanding and we'll form a set of shared values and understandings about that. But what multiculturalism does is it turns us into instead armed camps and draws a line between us, puts metaphorical barbed wire up and says, right, you can't insult him and he can't insult you, and now we're different and strange to one another, and now we're wary of one another. We can't build any trust between us. And so I think that multiculturalism is not what I think that we should be saying is here to stay. I don't think it's here to stay. I think it's a destructive force, and I think what we'll have is British culture and British versions of Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, and they'll be slightly different to the culture, the cultural versions in the countries that they come from, but they'll be based on a shared set of values. And that's the way we have to think about this going forward. Because I really have no opinion on race, and I don't really want to make any policies based on race. And
yeah, it's probably for the best.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's what the left is doing at the moment, and we have to oppose that. But sorry to attack the framing so hard.
No, I misphrased it. I would agree with you. No, I agree.
Well, no, it's easy to fall into but it's that framing that I've waited to get that off my chest for a long time, actually. But sorry, please carry on.
Well, no, I was going to say, because you were saying earlier about you can have different ethnicities making up the same culture. You take, for example, Singapore, where it's India, China, Japan. It's like all the kind of Oriental countries, and then they went from being developing to developed in one generation based on the fact they all have moot values, I think. Yeah. So would you agree with the statement then that we're kind of in the in-between phase of what the final identity will be? Because it seems to me like kind of we're waiting to see what will come out at the end. I feel like we're at the tipping point, really. It's which way will we go?
Well, I think it's important to remember that cultural identities are always evolving. Like, I mean, in Winston Churchill's day, he would have been very clear that he's a Brit, he's an Englishman, he knows exactly who he is and what he stands for. But now, 80 years afterwards, Winston Churchill himself is a core touchstone of the British identity.
I would agree entirely,
exactly. He represents the best of the British spirit in the face of diversity. And so when someone like John McDonnell says that Winston Churchill was in fact the villain, that's an attack on our identity. Because what good does it do to turn Winston Churchill from a hero into a villain? What good does that do in any way, shape or form? It doesn't change anything. It doesn't change anything in history. It doesn't change the results of history. But what it does do is come after how we view ourselves. Come after how we view our position in the world and how we view our position in this country. It's attacking on the identity. And Winston Churchill became a part of that identity because of his prominent role in World War II.
What I would agree is it'd be like having a go at Nelson Mandela for necklacing, for example, or
exactly.
murder of collaborators and stuff like that. I know what you mean entirely. I agree. Yeah, I agree.
The good doesn't wash out the bad, and the bad doesn't wash out the good. And like Oliver Cromwell said, we should accept it warts and all.
Warts and all. I like that.
Isn't that a good phrase, right?
It's a great phrase. It's a great phrase. 2 seconds. Shit. Oh, sorry. Got a potty mouth. So yeah, what would UKIP's plan, or at least your personal opinion, be on how to integrate people if it is possible to do so, or is it a gradual process? Is it a long process?
Actually, I think we can take a lot of tips from the Sikhs in this regard, because these people are generally very patriotic and proud of the country that they've come to. They came here because they like this country and they think that it was a good thing. And I think all we actually need to do is just have a positive opinion about ourselves. I think that we've gone through the period of extreme self-doubt where we've been very self-critical, and we've allowed, frankly, people who hate the country to drive the narrative on what the history of the country is. And I think that we can just refuse at this point and say, well, I appreciate your position. We understand that Britain isn't perfect. We had an imperial history. We can't change that. And obviously bad things were done during that time. But that doesn't wash out the good that we did, and that doesn't change the fact that Britain in the modern day doesn't suffer from the problems that Britain in the 19th century suffered from. We have become a better country, and we can be proud of the people who we are, that we can be proud of the country that we run. And I think that it's just this kind of self-confidence in your own personal identity attracts people who are foreign to us to want to be like us. They'll want to be included. It'll be something positive and good and optimistic that they'll want to be a part of. I don't think we have to do all that much other than just have faith in ourselves.
Yeah, I think there's a very, I want to say, dim view of British culture. It seems like a lot of people, especially British people themselves, people say they're sick of living here. They don't want to live here. They don't want to return. And I think, how are things going to get better if you don't want to come over and fix them? So I've got one more question. This is a bit of a hot button one, and it's mostly to do with your libertarian beliefs. What is your opinion on drugs? Just not any one in particular, or just in general from a libertarian point of view?
In general, decriminalising treat is a health issue.
I would agree entirely. Yeah, I would agree.
It comes from a far more drug prohibition. I mean, frankly, prohibition just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. When it comes to substances that people enjoy, whether you morally approve of this or not, prohibition doesn't work, and it never has. So I think we should drop the idea that we can criminalize people for taking drugs. And again, it's what you choose to take into your body, whether for right or wrong. I don't think it should be criminal, and I do think it should be treated as a health issue. And I think that removing the stigma away from these things would probably encourage people to actually seek help. Because I think the stigma does prevent that.
I would agree, and I think the other reason being is because it's illegal. Like, if you're 60 and you want to be a bit naughty, you go for a puff down the old bike shed. It's because I think because people view it as being wrong, it attracts people to do it more.
It's cool because it's illegal.
Yeah.
And that's true.
But yeah, that was the final one. Thank you very much for your time. I really enjoyed speaking to you.
Thank you. Thanks, chaps. It's never women saying that for some reason. my wife's happy with that though. Right, what's your name, sir?
Ethan Chase.
Nice to meet you, Ethan. How's it going?
Okay. So I told you earlier that
Yes.
I'm a member for the West New Forest, and I just wanted to ask you a question.
Mm-hmm.
So, which one do I want to ask first? Because I may have to ask one. So, in this area, so it's like in this entire sort of county area,
Yep.
especially in Hampshire, we are sort of a checkerboard of Labour and Tory gathered together and sort of rowing, and some places there's areas where there isn't, and some places where it is Labour. So what I'd like to ask you is, for my branch, what would be your idea of a way to get more support, more members and more voters in our local elections and in general elections as well?
Right, well, I mean, I think that what we're doing right here, right now, is a really positive thing. I think that it's having a really, really good effect on the public dialogue. And I don't think that we should stop doing this after these MEP elections. I think that this is something that, I'd be happy to do like one of these events once a month or something. Go to a local branch in wherever in the southwest, because it's my backyard, and put on events like this. Get the branch members down. Get people talking. Get people actually discussing the real issues. Speak to activists. And I've been told by branch members when I've been touring around the southwest that just my presence being here has got people engaged, and they've had a lot more people contact the branch saying, hey, I want to get involved. And I think that that is the way that we can actually start building UKIP from the ground up on local issues, and then go straight forward into general elections, so people are well aware that UKIP are not only on the ground and they care about what's really happening, they've been putting in the graft, they've been doing the work,
I feel that when I'm in my meetings, we usually talk about handing out leaflets and doing leaflet deliveries to houses and places. I find that's not a good solution from being a younger person's standpoint. I think more practical things like this and making public events that people come to and actually listen to is a lot more valuable in changing people's minds and making people think of multiple different ways of thinking, and trying to open their mind to the opposition, or just a different way of thinking to make them understand what's happening with the EU and what's happening as a whole in Brexit.
Yeah, and I think it becomes something that people on the margins who are passing by and who don't really know necessarily anything about these issues and might be hearing about them for the first time, it actually gives them an opportunity to just listen without being directly engaged. And it might be something that ends up interesting them. It might be something they find boring and walk off and, that aren't concerned with. But it at least puts it in the public sphere and says, look, there's something here. There are people who are concerned about these issues, and maybe you might want to start paying attention, because if it's not being reported on the news, and we're out here talking about it, there's probably a reason it's not being reported on the news.
Yeah, you certainly put information out a lot better than the media does currently.
Well, I don't know if I do, but I think that what I'm doing is putting out information in a way that engages in a essentially forbidden way, a way that you can't really engage with the media with, and they don't want to engage in that way. And it's frankly, I think, because it comes from a position of positivity regarding the country, and I don't think they've got it in themselves to do that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's really anything I want to ask
Thank you.
But yeah.
Hello, friend. What's going on?
Good, thanks, Kieran.
Kieran,
Hey.
I've met you before, haven't I?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Talking? Okay, cool.
I met you the other day, didn't I?
No, you've
No?
never met me
It was
before.
someone else, right?
Yeah,
Sorry.
I'm someone else. It's weird. It's because I always see you on screen, and now 20 years. It's weird.
Right, you got to hold it.
Yeah,
fairly
yeah.
close.
Just realised when I
Yeah.
was still in. Just got two really quick questions. It's the end of the day, so
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
getting tired. It's basically, the first one is the NHS. Do you believe it should have any limits on it at all? For example, say for example,
Everything has to.
Yeah. Say for example, when I'm like like doing some woodwork, or like, someone's doing some woodwork and they accidentally hit a nail into their hand, they go to the emergency room. Do you believe that should be covered by the NHS because it's non-life threatening, and it would and if they pay, it would actually supply money to the NHS?
No. I do think that sort of stuff should be free at the point of service.
Okay.
I think that what you're describing there is actually a small issue for the NHS. I think that
I agree. It's small.
I think that stopping health tourism is probably the first thing that I'd want to do, because I think that only people who are paying into the system should be able to benefit from the system. And so I mean that's a controversial thing to say now, isn't it? You know, well it is in Westminster though. That's the thing. We can't be the British taxpayer cannot be the health provider of the world, and it's unfair to expect them to do so. So I really think that it should be about, citizens. It's a healthcare for citizens, and maybe for foreigners who are visiting, maybe they should be charged, or maybe there's something, an insurance that they could take that's not necessarily expensive, but something that show that they're not just taking advantage, because I think that's unfair.
Yeah, I agree. And for the second question, it's basically, I believe you touched upon it with someone earlier, but I was talking with the other guys over there, so I didn't hear properly. It's basically. When you were I think you were talking about Article 13 or something, but my
Quite possibly.
Yeah. So my question is, do you think the government needs to sit down YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and just be like, right, are you a publisher or are you a platform, rather than just forcing YouTube, with Article 13, to force them to be considered a publisher, because that's kind of the.
Well, like I said to the earlier response to the question, it's not fair to make the tech giants of Silicon Valley publishers. They can't manage the kind of numbers that they have, and any attempt at solving the problems that are being presented to them will result in essentially like the tyranny of the algorithm, and the algorithm is not very good. I mean, Google has the best algorithms in the world because they can afford them, and they're still bad. They're really bad. They capture everything, no matter how uncontroversial it is. So we have to regard them exclusively as platforms. It's not practical to view them as publishers. It's not fair to do so.
Do you think it's fair to sit them because they have? I believe they have the rights of publishers right now, don't they? Without the consequence, because they can ban anyone they want.
Yep.
Do you think it's fair to sit them down and just say, we're not saying you are publishers, but are you publishers or platforms?
Well, what we should do is essentially enforce the fact that there are platforms on them. And I think that one of the things that we can do is actually take away their ability to just arbitrarily ban people. I actually do think that maybe the government should get involved, because these platforms are too big to... And I think that the tech giants themselves would want to defer this responsibility, because you can tell that, like Mark Zuckerberg... Recently, Mark Zuckerberg defended Holocaust deniers using Facebook before the media pressure became too great and they decided, right, okay, we'll just ban them then, we'll ban them. Because he was saying, well, look, I don't agree with it, but they have a sincere conviction. It's not that they're trying to hurt people. They genuinely believe this. And so instead of just giving Zuckerberg the power to delete, your million followers off Facebook that you've spent years building up and accruing, maybe it should go to a public arbitration, like a trial with a jury. Did this person do something wrong by the rules that have already been set? Maybe the jury should decide, and then a judgment can be made. I don't see why we would just leave such a powerful thing and in the hands of people who are just not responsible, because at the moment all we get is digital death sentences. I mean, they're actually just taking you out back and shooting your account in the head. Let's
kind of like yours demonetized.
Yeah, and Tommy Robinson and Paul Joseph Watson and all of the other conservatives who are being censored on Facebook and every other platform. It's happening consistently, and it's happening consistently to dissidents against the politically correct order, and it's unfair.
Has YouTube responded to you yet?
No. They're not going to tell me why. I'm not going to get it back.
Stupid.
Yeah. So I've accepted it.
Great. All right. Well, thank you for answering questions.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry. Is there any chance I can move the camera around a bit? Oh. Hello. Oh. Yes. I can't believe you're wearing a coat in this weather. Oh, right, okay. That's fine. Right, you'll need to hold this about pointing at your mouth. Perfect.
Okay, great.
Perfect.
Oh gosh, I just deleted them. Well, anyway, it doesn't matter. I can just. So I wanted to ask, what's UKIP's stance on facial recognition? And what do you think this means for us? Should we be concerned?
We should definitely be concerned. This is essentially us going down the same route as the Chinese government,
Absolutely.
which I'm sure I don't have to stress is not a route we should be going down. I don't know what UKIP's official position on this is, because this is quite a new issue that honestly I don't think they're switched on enough because they've got other things in front of them. You know, this is kind of crept up from behind on everyone. But I've got no doubt that because UKIP is essentially a kind of libertarian liberal party, they would be diametrically opposed to the issue. I mean, the Conservatives tweeted out the other day, didn't they, saying, you know, how would you feel about facial recognition software? Well, bad. You know, I think everyone would be in agreement that this is a bad idea, but it's something that they would love to implement because they're interested in social control. I think that UKIP would be the opposite of that. I think they would be very much against it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I absolutely agree. I think that our civil liberties are certainly being put at risk with facial recognition.
No question of it. And a chap was actually arrested and charged for covering his face.
I heard. That's unbelievable.
Yes, it's... Exactly.
It's really worrying because I feel like the UK is becoming a police state, and this is all because of the EU, really.
I'm not even sure if that's because of the EU. We're definitely the most surveilled society in all of human history. There are more cameras per square mile than anywhere else in the world, apparently. I don't think it's
that's terrifying.
I know, isn't it? Right?
Yeah.
But I don't think it's the EU that's done this. I think we've done this to ourselves, and I think it's the kind of like nanny state mentality where, instead of standing up for our liberties and our ability, it's always our ability to be independent of the government. It's part of this desire to use the government to solve all of the problems of the country, and I just don't think the government is capable of solving all those problems. For example, if you know, grooming gangs or grooming gangs, knife gangs in London, right? That is a direct consequence of a breakdown of society, the social structures that make up these communities. Frankly, parenting.
Absolutely.
It's a lack of fathers in the homes. No amount of government intervention can fix that. That requires the people who are having children but not marrying to realize the benefits of family values. And I don't know how many of these kids are going to have to stab each other to death before they realize that, but having children out of wedlock is definitely the problem there. And the government can't force people together. It can't force them to stay together. But I imagine there probably are ways that it can incentivize people not to have children out of wedlock.
Do you think that could be due to the education system not instilling these values?
Yes, I mean, I don't think the educational system necessarily should try and instill a certain kind of value, but
I think they should. I think British values should be taught in
but
all
I'm not
schools.
against the idea that the more we go on without this being done, the more I think maybe it might be necessary. But I think that there's definitely ways of incentivizing single parenthood, and I think that they're bad. I mean, they're bad for the kids. They end up being bad for the society around them. I think it's a way of effectively absconding from your own duty as a parent when you have when you're irresponsible in this way, because it is about being irresponsible, and it is about your personal responsibility as a parent to care for your child. And I do believe that we should do what we can not to subsidize that kind of lifestyle, which is the opposite opinion of the Labour Party, incidentally. So.
Oh, what did the Labour Party think?
Oh, they had no limit on the amount of benefit payments you could receive. So there were some people who had like 8 or 9 children who were getting over £100,000 a year from the taxpayer, and the Conservatives had to cap this at £25,000, which is still higher than the average wage in the country. And I don't think and I tell you what, man, you can go to any council estate in this country, and there are young women who are switched onto this. They know that the government will give them 20 grand a year and a house if they have a few children. And so they do. And it's not that they're bad people. It's just that they're being incentivized to do this. And I think that that's a genuinely negative thing for society as a whole. And it's bad for the kids.
It's a huge problem. My next question, what do you think about all the hate that you're getting from the leftists, and how do you deal with it? Because they really do come from a place of hate.
They do.
Whereas we come from a place of love for our great nation. And what do you think?
I think that when you're taking flack, it means you're over the target. And honestly, I find their efforts rather amusing. I'm very much enjoying it. Every hit piece is a laugh for me, and I tend to post a lot of them to my Telegram and have fun with them. So follow me on Telegram; it's great. But yeah, no. So I would be concerned if they weren't writing about me, because that means I would be having no effect at all.
Yeah.
The fact that they're trying to stop me means that I'm getting somewhere.
Yeah, I saw you on Victoria Derbyshire, and I thought you did really well. You came across
Thank
very
you.
well.
Thank you very much, because that was a very hostile interview, wasn't it?
Yeah. How was it?
She was angry.
Yeah.
I could sense the anger coming out of her. She was directly on the attack and leaning in, and I just wasn't. I just don't see her as a moral authority. So any kind of moral anyone who works at the BBC is not a moral authority. Okay, the BBC protected Jimmy Savile. Anyone who works there is essentially complicit. I do not see them as moral authorities. I see them actually as victimizers and bullies.
Yeah,
you know, I
absolutely.
mean, they are an institution. You know, I am just one guy, and it's not just the BBC. It's all of the other press outlets. When they're all punching down at just a YouTuber, you know, a guy in his office at home, then you know that I must be saying something that really threatens them, because otherwise they wouldn't waste their time.
I think they're very scared because they can see
so.
that, you know, we're fighting back.
Yes, I think so. Any other questions?
That was
or comments?
No, just thank you so much for everything that you're doing, and I think you really opened my eyes to a very true point, which is that the left are adopting all these concepts such as women's rights to I guess control us more.
Yes. They're laying claim to you on your identity as a woman.
Yes, exactly. And using identity politics to have control over us.
Yeah. And this is why I always say that the opposite, the answer to identity politics is party politics.
Yeah.
You should be able to you should be free to associate with whatever party you want. You know, you should join whatever party you want, vote for whatever party you want, and you shouldn't have people saying, no, you have to join us because you're a woman or you're black or you're X. You know, they don't own you. You know, you own you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Right. What time is it? How much longer have we got? What? I mean, battery power and things like that. Oh, okay. Oh, fab. So what time? 20 past 4. Right. Okay. Right. We'll do a couple more and then we'll go to the pub. Hello. Right. If you hold it about there.
Here.
Yeah, that's great. What's your name, sir?
Oh, my name's Kieran.
Nice to meet you, Kieran.
All right. I was going to talk to you about the No Outsiders program. I assume you're against it. Or are you kind of have a mixed opinion?
Ideologically, I have to be, because it's a far left initiative in order to try and further increase the hold that the radical left have over our education system. But I don't. That doesn't mean I'm necessarily against the idea of making sure that we're not leaving people out of discourse.
Yeah.
So you've got to frame it very carefully, because and it is a deliberate thing on their part. They say, well, no, we're for inclusion. Oh, you must be for exclusion. We're going to kick you out, and then they're excluding people in the name of inclusion. And it's all very clever word games that they play, and it's deliberately done. But in principle, yes. Not in principle. In practice, the way they're doing it, yes, I do oppose it. Yes.
Okay. From what I gather from it, it's just simply teaching kids about different family units, so just like, you know, same-sex parents, trans parents, that kind of thing. I was just wondering what's this ideological objection you have to it, because it's not that, like, you know, I'm not saying it doesn't exist, I just don't. Please enlighten me.
Well, I mean, for a start, I'm not sure that the schools should be teaching kids necessarily about different ideologies like sexualities. You know, they don't need to see that. They don't need to be taught that. I think they'll see the men and women interacting in their regular lives, and not just, you know, if there are trans people around them, they'll see trans people. If there are gay people around, they'll see gay people. I don't think we actually need to try and impose this on them. But the reason that they want to do this, in my opinion, is because there's not just one way of thinking about these things, and what they're trying to do is impose a particular way of thinking about them. For example, they'll undoubtedly at some point in their text say trans women are women. That's a highly controversial statement. It's not just decided. And if MMA and sports competitions show us anything, it's not true.
Okay, so oh, sorry.
Go So it's the fact that it's being framed by radically left-wing activists who have a particular agenda and a particular framing that I really object to. I mean, we can. I mean, I'm not even sure if it's appropriate to teach like 5-year-olds about homosexuality or transgenderism anyway. Because I mean, I'm the father of a 4-year-old. He doesn't need to know about any of this stuff, and I can't see him needing to know about any of this stuff for many years. You know, I mean, he's interested in what Transformer he is.
Okay, but just simply being exposed
Optimus
to
Prime, for anyone wondering.
Okay, but just simply being exposed to like trans parents and gay parents, that doesn't mean that you're talking about like sex or anything. It just means you're talking about like
I agree.
relationships. Yeah,
I agree. But the problem is, for me, for them, I suppose, is that I know what they're doing.
Okay, so
it's not a neutral thing that's being placed and saying, well, look, there's a lot of discussion about this. No, they have this is this, and you will believe this, or you're a bad person.
Okay, so I'm gathering that you're taking like a sort of libertarian view on it, somewhat.
I don't know if I necessarily describe that as libertarian.
I'm not trying to put words in your mouth.
No. It's fair. I would say that I'm just very aware of the neo-Marxist agenda, and this is a part of it. And there's no doubt about that. And look up the term neo-Marxism if you need more information. But there's no doubt that that's a part of it.
I'm familiar with the content. Don't worry. I watched.
I figured you were. But for anyone watching.
Oh, really?
But no, it's definitely part of that agenda. And I mean, what was the chap's name? I can't remember the name of the guy who ran it. The gay head teacher.
Oh,
I can't remember his name.
Yeah,
but you know the guy I'm talking about.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about. Yeah,
and you can see it in the interviews with him. He's using that rhetoric. He's using that kind of framing, and so it's obvious what's happening here, I think.
Okay. Something else I was going to ask you about actually while I'm here was what does UKIP have an ideology, or is it what's the term I'm looking for? It's kind of it has no ideology, and would you say that's a benefit to it, or?
Honestly, I'm not sure there's any such thing as having no ideology. The more I've learned,
agree with that.
The more I've learned over the years, the more I've come to realize that I think your ideology is effectively the way you view the world. And for people who don't think about their ideology much, they tend to be they tend to have an ideology that's just part of the sort of dominant cultural fabric of the nation. And in this country, it's British liberalism. And so UKIP. I mean, I'm an ideological liberal. I've spent a lot of time.
You're a classical liberal,
or
social liberal.
Social liberal is how it,
like the sort of John Locke, John Stuart Mill.
Yeah, and honestly, I call myself an English liberal because it is different from the French and American traditions, for example.
I mean, I'm probably like sort of like an American type of liberal, and like a social democrat. Like I'm on the left.
Honestly, I'm very sympathetic to the sort of Jeffersonian Republican values, the bedrock of it. I am sympathetic to that, but but the people in UKIP, so they tend to come from a generally an unspoken British liberal tradition, and so whenever I say something, it tends to be well received. And I'll be saying, whenever I say something, I believe that as a liberal, I think this. It'll be generally quite well received because we are a liberal country. We invented liberalism. This is the home of it, and
that's the Enlightenment. So.
Well, yeah, but it began here, and. It really took deep roots here, and they're very individualistic, and they have a very keen sense of fairness, and they are concerned with state intervention in your life. They want to restrict that when unnecessary, and so I would describe them as a liberal party, and I wish they'd take more ownership of it because they are a liberal party, and frankly, out of all of the Enlightenment ideologies, liberalism's the only one with any credibility left. It's the only one left standing that didn't cause absolute butchery on purpose throughout the 20th century. So I think we should be proud of it.
Actually, while I'm here, what is your opinion on conservatism?
They don't have any moral values. They have whoever's moral values came before them.
Okay.
I really hate it, because at the moment, our conservatives are Tony Blair's moral values. They're preserving open borders. They're preserving a decline of British culture. They're preserving the attacks on free speech. They are not positive and forward thinking, in my opinion, and that's why I don't consider myself a conservative. I'm a liberal,
Yeah, sort of old school liberal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, there's other people who want to talk to you, so.
Well, thank you very much for coming out.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care.
Right, should we make this the last one? Right, great. Yeah, come on, man. Yeah. Have a microphone. What's your name, sir?
My name's Dakota.
Dakota, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
How's it going?
Pretty good.
You got a little bit closer.
Is this good?
Yeah, so what would you like to say?
I know you were talking about it a few interviews before me.
Right.
But I went to piss, so I kind of missed a large part of it. But it was about social media regulation and regulating the way they are publishers or platforms. And from what I'm aware, you see them as having monopolies on their
effective
area.
Monopolies.
Yeah, effective monopolies. And
sorry, give me 2 seconds. Excuse me, why don't you come and talk to us? We'd love to see what your objection is.
You can take my seat.
This gentleman will... I guess just shouting at us from afar is much more productive. Sorry about that, chap. Right, so effective monopolies.
Effective monopolies.
Yes.
But to have a monopoly, say if Tesco became a monopoly, they'd have a monopoly on shopping centres or Tesco stores, and they'd own a large amount of property. There'd be no room for an alternative supermarket to buy their property and be able to afford that.
Yes.
Internet hosting, incredibly cheap. Bandwidth, relatively cheap for a large social media platform to come around, say Gab. So what do these social media platforms to you have a monopoly on?
Effectively, it's attention. Because the thing with social media is it's made up of the people who use it, and it's nothing without them. And so what I really like is the way that Jack Dorsey described Twitter. He said, I didn't invent Twitter, I discovered it. I discovered a way of creating a toxic miasma of nastiness where people are just snarky towards each other all day, every day. He didn't quite say it this way, but what he was saying is I've tapped into the very worst of human nature and made it dominate our political discourse. Which means that if you're interested in that kind of thing, because there are so many people already using Twitter, it's not worth going anywhere else, because the point is to interact with other people. So there's no point using any other kind of social media, which is why there are alternatives to Facebook, but nobody uses them because Facebook exists. Facebook does the job already. What's the point of going anywhere else? Because everyone's already on Facebook. And it's quite a unique thing. I mean, social media is obviously a brand new thing that we're just getting used to. And this is why I don't want to describe them as monopolies as such, as traditionally understood. But I think there is a kind of social monopoly that happens with social media. And I think that the people who created it, like Jack Dorsey, Mark Zuckerberg, I think they're aware of the problems that have come. I mean, the co-founder of Facebook suggested it should be broken up. And that's the co-founder. That's not some, angry progressive.
I found that quite an odd thing to say, because Facebook to break, what does to break Facebook up mean exactly?
I don't even know, but he thinks that it's amassing too much power, and I think it is, and I think that the problem is, like, there's a clip of him saying, look, we knew what we were doing when we did it, and yet we did it anyway. We knew that it was creating people who would just look for content that they like to see, and we'd encourage them to see more of that, which is effectively radicalizing people. It's preventing them from seeing alternative viewpoints. And he seems to feel really guilty about it, because I don't think they expected billions of people to use it. And it's kind of one of those, the genie's out of the bottle now. We've got to do something about the genie. Can't say, oh, well, we should have done something better. It's way too late for all of that. And social media is creating real problems. And I think I think that Twitter is radicalizing the press. Oh, I think it's turning them nuts,
I think Twitter is radicalizing sort of every demographic.
Well, yeah, it is, yeah. But especially the political class. And I think that a serious conversation about social media needs to be had. But I also do believe that the CEOs of these tech giants would probably appreciate if we did take a lot of the pressure off of them. Because, again, like, you can see this with Jack Dorsey. The guy looks like a monk. The guy looks like, I bet he never uses Twitter. I bet if you look at his Twitter activity, it's like one tweet a week or something. I bet he's like, oh, God, no, you don't want to use Twitter, kids, And then he goes off and goes and on some retreat where he meditates for 5 hours just to try and get away from the stress that he's causing the world. But he's on top of this beast now, and he's riding it, and he's got to do something about it. And I don't think they're in an enviable position at all. And I think that anything that we do to these tech platforms, I think we've got to stop looking at it like we're intruding on their private property and we're hurting the businessman, because I don't think that's how they view it. I think they view it as someone save us from ourselves and from what we're doing to society.
That very well answers my question about your worldview. And I have one more question. If a Democrat were to win 2020 elections, why would you want it to be Andrew Yang and his $1,000 a month?
I want it to be Tulsi Gabbard, man. Andrew Yang doesn't have enough money to give her on $1,000 a month, so he's going to have to raise taxes.
$1,000 a month, though.
But Tulsi Gabbard, though.
Okay, but $1,000 a month.
Yeah, but would you rather Andrew Yang on a dollar bill or Tulsi Gabbard on a dollar bill? See? Yeah, see?
Thanks for your time, Sargon.
Anytime, man. Thanks for coming down. Really appreciate it. Right. Is there any chance we can ask you all for a group photo? Because, my God, this has been an amazingly good crowd. So, yeah, if you guys can squeeze in... honestly, I might have to go on the other side, actually, because this... I'm going to have to walk a bit back.
Yeah, you stand there. John, take it from here.
Yeah, I can take it. I'll go on the other side and get a photo of you.
Yeah, I can take it. Yeah, get the photos in first, mate. In a second.
Why everybody move back? Alright, you want to take it here?